Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I worked night security at a manufacturing plant in North Carolina, about 20 minutes outside Asheville. Middle of nowhere, really. The plant backed up to a big stretch of undeveloped woodland, state-owned, I think. And the whole compound was fenced in, surrounded by pine and gravel and not much else. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and it was mostly quiet. We had a skeleton crew on the floor overnight, maybe 5 guys in the whole building. I was the only guard on duty. There were 16 cameras I was supposed to monitor from the office. Most of them were focused on loading docks, doors, parking lots, standard stuff. We didn't get much trouble, just the occasional raccoon setting off a motion alert or someone forgetting their badge. One camera covered the East Service Road, the narrow access lane that looped behind the building toward the woods. That feed, camera 12, was the only one that faced directly out toward the tree line, with a big patch of sky above it. The first time I noticed anything weird was in February, cold and clear that night. I remember I was halfway through a cup of instant ramen, bored out of my mind, when the camera feed flickered. It wasn't a full glitch, more like a shimmer, like heat haze or something underwater, only on that one feed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then it snapped back to normal. I rewound the footage, but the recording skipped over the shimmer entirely. Just cut from 2:36:59 to 2:37:02, like nothing happened. Thought it might have been a tech hiccup. We had spotty signal on a few of the older cameras, especially when it got cold. But the next night it happened again. Same camera, same exact time, 2:37 a.m. Another quick flicker, a kind of warped ripple through the background sky behind the tree line. Then back to normal. I started watching for it after that. Every single night, without fail, camera 12 glitched at exactly 2:37. Always the same shimmer in the same spot, high in the sky, near the upper right of the frame. Sometimes it lasted just a second. Other nights it stretched to 3 or 4. Never showed up in the recordings, just skipped that time entirely, like the DVR didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would care? Tech acts up, right? But it kept happening. Weeks passed and it never missed a night. The distortion stayed in the same part of the sky, too, never shifted left or right, never got closer or farther, just shimmered, then vanished. One night I stepped outside to see if I could catch it in person. Brought my thermos with me, walked out past the loading dock around 2:30. There was a thin frost on the gravel. I stood behind the fence and looked up at the trees, waiting. At 2:37, I felt something. I didn't see anything, not really. The stars stayed put. The sky looked normal, but there was this faint pressure in the air, like a low-frequency hum you couldn't hear, only feel. My chest tightened, the hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't cold, it was something else. Like the atmosphere changed for a second, like everything went off balance, then it passed. Just like that. I went back inside and checked the feed. Sure enough, the camera had shimmered again. I started keeping a log after that. Dates, times, weather conditions. Tried to matter if it was clear, cloudy, raining, windy. Camera 12 always glitched at 2:37. Then one night in March, the shimmer changed. Instead of the usual warping ripple, the sky behind the trees bulged, like something invisible pushed out from behind the feed, distorting the image. Only for a second, but it was enough to make me lean closer. I thought maybe the camera had finally cracked or water got inside the lens. I paused the live feed and zoomed in. There was a shape, barely visible, like a smear of light bending around something solid, right in the middle of that bulge. I couldn't describe it exactly. It wasn't round, but not angular either. It had no clear edges. Just this suggestion of presence, right where the shimmer always happened. The moment I let go of the zoom button, the feed cut out entirely. Camera 12 went black. I rebooted the system, but it didn't come back until 2:41. When it did, the view was normal again. The next night, the camera worked fine. At 2:37, the shimmer returned, back to the usual warping. The shape didn't show up again. Not for a while. About a week later, I brought a small set of binoculars from home. Nothing fancy. I figured if the distortion lined up with something in the real sky, maybe I'd catch it. Around 2:30, I stepped outside again and stood behind the east lot. Brought a laser pointer with me too. Not to do anything with, just to mark the spot for myself. At 2:37, I aimed the binoculars at the same patch of sky and waited. That's when I noticed the silence. No wind. No crickets. No distant truck hum from the highway. Just absolute stillness. Then the pressure came again, stronger this time. My vision through the binoculars wobbled for a second, like I was looking through thick glass. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, like I'd stood up too fast. Something flickered past the stars. I don't know how else to say it. A flash of not sky, just a split second of something darker, more textured. Then it was gone. I lowered the binoculars and just stood there. I didn't go back inside right away. After that, things started to feel different in the office. Not wrong, exactly. Just watched. Like there was something just outside the edges of the camera feeds, waiting for 2:37 tick over. One night, I tried calling the security company's tech team to ask about replacing camera 12. I didn't say why, just that the feed kept glitching. The guy on the phone checked the logs and said he didn't see any errors. According to their system, the feed had been stable for months. I asked if the system ever skipped over timestamps. He said no. It wasn't designed that way. I hung up. A few nights later, something new happened. I was pouring coffee when I heard a click from the monitor bank. Not a glitch, an actual mechanical sound like someone pressed a button. I turned and saw camera 12 was no longer showing live footage. It had switched to playback mode 2:37 a.m. from earlier that night. Only this time, there was footage. No shimmer, no glitch, just a frozen frame of the trees and something in the sky above them. That same vague shape I'd seen before. Clearer now. Almost translucent, like a jellyfish but without tentacles. Hovering, motionless, high above the tree line. It didn't move. It just hung there. Then the screen flicked back to live view on its own. I didn't touch anything. That was the last time I saw anything that clear. After that, the shimmer kept happening, but the shape never came back. At least not on camera. One night, near the end of March, I went outside one last time around 2:35. I stood in the same spot behind the fence and looked up at the same patch of sky. At 2:37, I felt the pressure again. And this time, I heard something. Not a hum, not a voice. Just this faint clicking like stone tapping on metal. It came from above, steady and slow. 5 clicks, then silence. I backed away and went inside. I didn't go out there again after that. The shimmer still showed up on camera 12, same time, same spot, every night. I stopped watching it, started turning the monitor off just before 2:37. I didn't quit the job or move away or anything like that, but I stopped asking questions. It never glitched on any other camera. Never happened during the day. Only there. Only then. Only that sky. I'd been logging observations from my backyard for a little over 3 years by the time this happened. I lived just outside of Carbondale, Colorado, a little past the town, up near the edge of some BLM land. It's not full wilderness, but there's enough space and elevation to get decent sky views without too much light pollution. I work from home during the day doing CAD stuff for a surveyor, but astronomy's always been my thing. I use a mid-range Celestron Schmidt Cassegrain scope. Nothing fancy, but good enough for what I do. I don't do astrophotography or anything. I mostly just track objects, compare position logs, and make little notations. I like the routine of it. There's something calming about checking in on stars like old friends. The one I'd been watching that summer didn't even have a real name. It was just one of the background stars near 61 Cygni. That pair's pretty noticeable in a low-power field, so I used them as a reference. The star in question was about 7 arc minutes off their line, just a dull reddish pinpoint that didn't stand out much. I logged its position every few nights, just out of habit. I noticed something weird the first week of August 4th, I think. I remember because there'd been a monsoon burst the night before, rare, but we got hit with heavy rain for almost an hour. Everything was still damp. I set up a little later than usual, around 10:30 p.m., and did my usual sweep. The star wasn't quite where I expected. just a little off. Not dramatically, but enough that I double-checked my alignment. I thought maybe the tripod had shifted from the soft ground or I'd entered the coordinates wrong. It happens. I recalibrated, adjusted the tracking, and moved on. But 2 nights later, it was further off. Not by a huge amount, but clearly not in the right spot. Not if it was supposed to be a background star. I verified with my star maps and even booted up Stellarium to compare. It was drifting, slowly, sideways, not across the sky, not in the normal east to west everything follows, but literally shifting against the stars behind it. Stars don't do that. Planets and satellites, sure, but not stars. Not faint, anonymous background stars. I kept watching it every night I could. Sometimes clouds ruined things, but I got solid observations on August 6th, 8th, 9th, and 11th. Same trend each time. It was drifting leftward, maybe half an arc minute per day, always the same direction. No wobble, no flicker. It didn't match any satellite I could ID, and I even submitted a query to the Heavens Above forum asking if anyone had seen something similar. No real replies, just guesses about software errors or user mistake. I started logging the movement more carefully, writing down exact coordinates and sketching its new position relative to the Cygni pair. On the 13th, I stayed out past midnight to see if the motion happened in real time or just night to night. That's when it got weirder. Around 12:40 a.m., I was watching the field at medium magnification, just letting the mount track normally, when I noticed a faint blink, like something dimming slightly, then returning. Not a flare or flash, just a soft pulse. Then again, maybe 10 seconds later, I shifted to high mag and stared at the star. It pulsed a third time, and then, slowly, like barely perceptible movement, it began to drift. I don't mean it orbited out of view or tracked with the Earth's rotation. I mean the star itself moved across the field. Very slightly, but steadily. I could see it leaving the position it had held all summer. I kept thinking it had to be an illusion, then some internal reflection or tracking issue, but the stars around it stayed locked in place. Only that one moved. After about 2 minutes, it stopped. Just halted. It held that new position for the rest of the night. I marked it, checked again 20 minutes later. Still there. I didn't sleep much. The next day, I tried everything to explain it. I updated all the firmware, rebalanced the mount, recalibrated from scratch. But when I checked again the next night, the star had moved again, just a bit. Same direction. Still faint red. Still wrong. On August 16th, I stayed out until almost 2 a.m. Clouds were moving in from the west, so I knew I didn't have long. I had just found the star again, further left than ever, when something odd caught my attention. Not in the scope, but with my eyes. The trees behind my house, there's a line of them that separates my yard from the BLM trail, had this faint light behind them. Not bright, and not from the moon, which was a crescent that night low to the south. It was like a cold bluish glow, too even to be a headlamp or house light. It didn't move, but it lit up the branches just enough to make the shadows look wrong. I went to the edge of the yard and tried to listen. No sound, no wind, no animals. I remember thinking that was the strangest part. No insects, no breeze, just silence. The glow faded after maybe 30 seconds, just slowly died away until everything looked normal again. I walked out past the fence thinking maybe someone was out there with a lantern or some gear, but I didn't see anyone. The ground was still a little muddy from recent rains, and I didn't find any footprints except mine. The star was still in the scope when I got back. It hadn't moved again. But I felt unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. I brought the telescope in early that night. On August 18th, I caught something on video. I usually don't record anything, but I'd started leaving a small camera mounted to the eyepiece to review footage. At exactly 12:43 a.m., the star pulsed again, not just dimmed, but flared slightly and then snapped sideways in the field of view. Not fast, not like a shooting star or a satellite. It slid like something floating underwater, then stopped. It stayed there for the next hour. When I played back the video the next day, I watched it 4 or 5 times. The camera caught it clearly, not just a tracking error. The entire sky field stayed steady. Only that one pinpoint of light moved. I tried to compare the motion to known objects, but nothing matched. It didn't behave like any celestial body I knew. I emailed the video to a guy I know who does tracking for a university program in Boulder. He wrote back saying my scope was probably misaligned and I was recording reflections. I stopped logging it after that. It didn't feel right anymore. The last time I saw it was the night of August 22nd. It had drifted so far from the Cygni pair that I had to hunt for it. Same red dot, same faint shimmer when it pulsed. But this time, after a short drift, it flickered hard, like a flicker you see when you lose HDMI signal on a TV, and vanished, not dimmed, not trailed off, just gone. I waited an hour, scanning the whole patch of sky. It never reappeared. I haven't seen it since. I still go out with the scope some nights, not as much as before, and I don't watch that part of the sky anymore. I know it sounds dumb. It feels watched, like something noticed me noticing it. It was Labor Day weekend, 2 years ago. Me, Colin, Jaya, and Brett had rented this little A-frame cabin outside of Leavenworth up in the Cascades. Kind of a last-minute thing just to get out of the city for a few days. The place was small. No TV, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just a wood stove, a deck, and a view of the tree line. Perfect, honestly. We'd brought board games, beer, and a bunch of groceries, planning to hike during the day and just hang out at night. The third night, Sunday, we stayed up late sitting around the fire pit behind the cabin. We'd run out of firewood around 10, but nobody wanted to go inside yet, so we just sat in the dark. No moon that night, just a mess of stars overhead. The sky was clear, like I don't think I'd seen that many stars at once in my entire life. We were all in camping chairs, me and Colin on one side of the fire ring, Brett and Jaya across from us. Someone put on a playlist off a downloaded Spotify queue, something mellow, and we just sat there drinking hard cider and pointing out constellations we thought we recognized. Real quiet. Maybe 2 hours went by like that. Around midnight, Colin said something like, "What's that?" and pointed up over the trees to the south. At first I thought he meant a plane, but when I looked I saw this bright white light way up, too high and still for a drone, too slow for a plane. It was moving. Yeah, but it was this slow, steady glide. Not blinking, not making any noise, and totally smooth. We all started watching it. It didn't change speed or altitude, just kept drifting northward. I figured it was some kind of satellite, but Jaya said it was too bright and too low for that. I remember she said, "It's way below the stars," and she was right. It passed in front of a few, not behind. The four of us watched it for maybe 30 seconds, maybe more. Long enough for the conversation to die down completely. Then the light stopped, midair, just froze in place like someone pressed pause. No stutter, no flicker, it just stopped. Nobody said anything right away. I think we all expected it to resume like a trick of perspective or something, but then it started getting brighter, not fast, slowly, like a dimmer switch turning up. It went from star-level brightness to something more like a headlight in fog, and then this part I still don't get. It split, not exploded, not broke apart. Just separated. The single bright light became 3 smaller lights, all equal in size and brightness, spaced evenly apart like a perfect triangle. Not a huge triangle, but wide enough to notice. They didn't fall or scatter, just hovered there, totally still. That was the first time I remember feeling uneasy. The way they stayed in sync, no drift, no wobble, it didn't look natural. Brett leaned forward and said, "That's not right." And I remember nodding but not looking away. It was like the lights were aware of each other, like they were holding a formation. A perfect one. Then they moved. Together, straight upward, just a few degrees, and then to the left. Still in triangle form, still at the same speed. Then they stopped. Then they did it again. Up. Stop. Right. Stop. Down. Stop. Almost like they were mapping something. I looked at Jaya. She was gripping the arms of her chair, not blinking. Colin had set his cider on the ground without realizing it. Brett had his phone out, but we didn't have signal and the camera couldn't focus in the dark. He got one blurry shot, just a smear of light. That's all we have. The lights kept shifting, maybe 5 or 6 times, always together. Not random. Definitely not random. Then, and I swear this happened exactly like this, they moved upward, paused, and then blinked. One single pulse of light, almost like a camera flash. And then they were gone. Gone like, not flown off. Just gone. Like a light turned off, but the sky was totally clear. No clouds, no cover. One blink, and they vanished. We all kind of looked at each other like, Did that happen? Colin stood up and started pacing. Brett just kept checking his phone, even though it was obvious he wasn't getting signal. Jaya finally said, "Okay, that's enough for me," and went back inside. I followed her in after a minute. Didn't say much. None of us did, really. It wasn't like in movies where everyone freaks out. We just kind of shut down. Brett and Colin stayed out there another 10 minutes maybe, and then came in too. Nobody brought it up again until the next morning. We went through all the usual stuff: satellites, drones, military aircraft, weather balloons, but none of it made sense. Satellites don't hover or blink out. Drones don't fly that high and stay in triangle formations without sound. It was too precise. And that light, I can still picture it. White, almost clinical, but soft at the edges. Not like a beam, just a presence. We checked the news that day, thinking maybe other people had seen something, but there was nothing. Not even a weather anomaly. Just normal reports. Clear skies, light wind. We didn't stay another night. Packed up that afternoon and drove back to Seattle early. Nobody said why, but we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever that was, it wasn't something we wanted to be near again. I was camping alone off an old Forest Service road just west of Bend, Oregon. This was late October, right before the snow really starts to stick. I'd gone out for a quick overnight, just needed to get out of town and clear my head. Nothing crazy, just a simple setup. One-man tent, sleeping pad, a Jetboil, and my dog Nellie. She's a red heeler mix. Smart, a little neurotic, but a good trail dog. I'd rescued her from a shelter in Klamath Falls a couple years earlier, and she's been my go-to companion ever since. She sleeps light too, which I always appreciated out in the woods. Anyway, we parked just off a spur road that'd been chewed up by logging trucks and hadn't been graded in years. Hiked in, maybe a mile and a half, to a clearing I'd been to once before. A flat patch near a shallow creek, surrounded by lodgepole pine and some younger firs. There was no cell service out there, which I liked. Just the sound of the wind and the occasional squirrel freaking out. I set up camp around 5 p.m. just as the lights started to go. It had been a gray, damp day, cold, but not freezing. The kind of weather that settles in your bones if you stop moving for too long. I made a small fire, cooked a pack of ramen, and gave Nellie some kibble. She wandered the edge of the clearing while I ate, nose to the ground, tail up. Around 7:30, it was already getting dark, so I packed out the fire and climbed into the tent. I had my Garmin watch on, just a basic GPS tracking model I used for trail runs and hikes. I always sleep with it on when I'm out alone. Not for any particular reason, just habit. Sometimes I'll check my heart rate or altitude in the morning. That night, I remember checking the battery before I went to sleep, 71%. I didn't set an alarm. I woke up once around 2 a.m. because Nellie growled. Not a full bark, just a low, deep-throated warning. I sat up, unzipped the sleeping bag, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no branches breaking, no distant engines, just wind moving through the trees. I put a hand on Nellie's back and she stayed rigid for a minute, then laid back down. I figured maybe a deer or a raccoon had wandered close. That wasn't unusual. I didn't really fall back asleep after that. I dozed on and off, mostly listening. Nothing else happened. It was one of those long nights where the dark feels like it stretches on forever. I didn't hear Nellie make another sound. When the sky finally started to lighten around 6:45, I got out of the tent, stretched, and fired up the Jetboil for coffee. Nellie trotted a little circle around the clearing, sniffed the air, then sat near the tent and stared into the trees. Not unusual, just watchful. It wasn't until I sat down with the coffee that I remembered to check the watch. I pulled it up like I always do, just curiosity, seeing what my sleep heart rate looked like. But when I toggled to the GPS history, I saw something weird. A track had been logged between 1:58 a.m. and 2:44 a.m. It was labeled walk, which was already odd because I hadn't moved from the tent. The start time lined up almost exactly with when Nellie had growled. The GPS path showed a near-perfect circle. It looped around my tent about 15 feet out. A smooth, uninterrupted line, no erratic jumps, no doubling back. It completed 4 laps, then stopped. Total distance, 0.57 miles. Duration, 46 minutes. Average pace, 20 minutes per mile. It made no sense. I sat there for a long time, staring at the little red trail on the screen. I thought maybe I'd rolled over in my sleep and somehow triggered the motion sensor, but the shape was too clean, too even, and I never left the tent. I was awake for most of that time, I was sure of it. I looked around the clearing for footprints. The soil was soft, damp in spots. I expected to see something, my own prints from the day before, Nellie's paw marks, but nothing fresh. No sign of someone or something circling us. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a glitch, that maybe the watch picked up a false signal. But then I looked at Nellie again. She hadn't moved from her spot. She was still staring into the trees. Not tense, not afraid, just locked in, watching. I packed up fast. Coffee half drunk, tent still damp. I didn't even bother rolling the sleeping bag properly, just stuffed it in the sack and clipped it to my pack. Nellie stuck close the whole time, which wasn't like her. Normally she'd wander as I packed, but that morning she didn't go more than a few feet from me. We hiked out quick. I kept glancing back toward the clearing, even though I couldn't see it anymore. Every crack of a branch made me twitch. When we got back to the car, I sat there for a while before starting it. Turned the watch off completely. I didn't delete the track, but I haven't opened it again either. It's still in the history, labeled walk. I haven't been back to that spot since. I left my sister's place in Hutchinson around 11:40 p.m. It was one of those summer nights that never fully cool off, even after the sun's long gone. Dry heat clinging to everything, especially the inside of my truck, which hadn't seen working AC in about a year. I had the windows down and a warm breeze coming through, just enough to keep me from sweating through my shirt. The drive from Hutch back to my place in Nickerson is about 35 minutes if you don't get behind a tractor or someone hauling a camper. Just flat, open Kansas highway most of the way, with a few grain elevators breaking up the horizon and long stretches of soy fields on either side. About 5 or 6 miles out of town, I noticed a bright light in the sky up ahead. I assumed it was a plane at first, not unusual with the Wichita airport an hour or so southeast. But it wasn't blinking. It just sat there, bright and still, maybe a little bigger than the usual plane light. White, not bluish like a star. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe 10 more miles down the road, I realized it was still there, same position in the sky, same brightness. I started thinking maybe it was Venus or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a little too low and a little too bright. I told myself it was just my brain playing tricks on me, nothing else to look at out there. That stretch between Medora and Yagi is boring as hell at night. I kept glancing up at it, every couple of minutes. Still there, still not moving. Except it kind of was. Not like it was flying, more like it was gliding along the same route I was driving, always just a little ahead, slightly above the tree line to the northwest. I slowed down once just to see if it would shift, and damned if it didn't seem to slow with me. I sped up. It sped up, or at least it kept the same position. I told myself I was being dumb, that I was just noticing it more now that I was alone in the dark. Then I started passing familiar spots, the old silo where the roof caved in, that rundown produce stand someone tried to revive a couple years back, the little turnout where kids used to park and drink in high school. The light was still there through all of it, like it was escorting me, or watching me. I had the radio off. I hadn't even realized it until then. Just the wind and the tires humming. I turned it on, flipped through the stations, but nothing came in clear. Static, old Christian talk radio, and one country song that sounded like it was playing underwater. I shut it back off. I told myself again it was just a star, just a bright planet, something like that. But when I passed the river bend near Sand Hill State Park, I got this weird feeling, like a pressure behind my eyes. Not pain, but a thickness. I don't know how else to describe it. My ears popped, even though there was no change in elevation. I swallowed hard and glanced up again. Still there. That was when I decided to stop. Not out of fear, exactly. More like I needed to prove to myself that it wasn't moving, that it was just a fixed light and I'd been letting my imagination get the better of me. I pulled into the gravel turnout near that old pump station by the creek. Shut off the engine. The wind died instantly. No breeze. just quiet. I stepped out, stood there, and looked up. Gone. It hadn't moved, it hadn't dimmed, it hadn't drifted behind a cloud. There weren't any clouds. It just wasn't there anymore. I walked around to the front of the truck and squinted up, trying to find it. Nothing. Just regular stars now. A handful visible through the ambient glow from Hutch behind me, but none of them bright or low like that one had been. I stood there maybe 2 full minutes, just listening. No insects, no frogs from the creek, no rustling grass. It was like everything was holding its breath. Then my phone buzzed in the truck. It startled the hell out of me. I went back and checked it. No service. Just a missed notification from unknown. No message. Just the alert that something had come in. I've had that happen once or twice before in bad signal spots, so again, I tried not to let it get to me. But it didn't feel right. I got back in, shut the door, and restarted the engine. Pulled back out onto the road and started driving again. That's when I noticed the air was cooler. Not cold, but the heat had broken in the span of 5 minutes. My windows fogged up a little. I turned on the defrost, looked up. The light was back, but this time it was higher, smaller, like it had pulled straight back farther into the sky. Still dead center ahead of me, though, just much farther away. That was the part that got to me, the alignment. No matter how much I curved on the highway, no matter how much I slowed or sped up, it kept itself in the same place above the road. It stayed with me the whole rest of the drive. I turned off onto Sterling Road, got closer to my house, past the grain co-op and the rail crossing, and it was still there, just above the tree line, straight ahead. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine off, watching through the windshield. My porch light had come on. I could see my mailbox, the front steps, my neighbor's rusted swing set across the field. The light in the sky didn't move. It looked smaller now, higher, but still present, still in the exact same spot. I opened the door and stepped out. Nothing. It was gone again. This time I didn't linger. I went inside, locked up, and stood by the window for a while with the lights off, staring out at the sky. There was nothing unusual the rest of the night. I didn't sleep much, but nothing else happened. The next day, I checked the weather apps and flight trackers. Nothing was showing up over that part of the state at that time. Clear skies, no alerts. I even called a buddy of mine who used to fly crop dusters, told him about the light. He said I probably saw a drone or a weather balloon. But I could hear the doubt in his voice, even if he didn't say it. It's been a few months since that drive. I've gone the same route half a dozen times since, day and night. Never saw the light again, but I don't take that turnout near the pump station anymore. I don't even look in that direction when I pass it. Just keep driving. It was around 8:30, maybe a little later. I just finished cleaning up after dinner and stepped out onto the back porch with a glass of wine. It had been one of those sticky summer days where the air felt heavy, and by sunset, the clouds had piled up thick over the tree line behind our yard. We live just outside Wilmington, quiet neighborhood, a couple acres between houses, big old oaks everywhere. It's not unusual to get pop-up storms around here, especially late July. I was alone that evening. My husband, Trent, had gone up to Raleigh for work, staying overnight. The kids were at my sister's doing a weekend thing with their cousins. So it was just me and our mutt, Poppy. She's a black and white border collie mix, all nervous energy and paws too big for her frame. She doesn't like storms, but she was curled under the porch swing next to me, ears twitching. The thunder had been getting louder for about 20 minutes, and then it really cracked. Deep, rolling booms you could feel in your chest, the kind that make you instinctively count the seconds after the flash. I wasn't planning to sit out long, just liked watching the sky light up over the trees. It started with a couple flashes off in the distance. Bright, but normal. Just heat lightning. But then I saw a bolt shoot sideways across the clouds, like horizontal instead of vertical. That was weird enough to make me sit up. It stretched nearly across the whole sky, from one end of the horizon to the other, and it held. I don't mean it flickered and faded, I mean it stayed. Lit up, fully visible, like a giant glowing crack frozen in place. Poppy whined. Not a bark, not a growl, just a low, anxious sound in her throat. I stood up. The porch steps creaked behind me, loud in the sudden quiet. There was no thunder, no wind, no insect sounds either. I didn't realize it until later, but everything else had stopped. No cicadas, no frogs from the pond across the way, no distant car noise, just that frozen bolt of lightning in a sky that looked wrong somehow. And then I noticed it. There was something dark in the clouds, dead center, where the lightning had split the sky, just behind the brightest part of the flash. It was hard to see at first, like my eyes didn't want to focus on it, but it was there. A black, triangular shape, sharp-edged and huge, way too big to be a bird or a drone. It wasn't moving, just sitting in the clouds, perfectly still. It didn't blink lights or make a sound. No hum, no buzz, nothing. Just this massive dark wedge hanging in the sky, half wrapped in cloud, like it had always been there and I just never noticed. I don't know how long I stared. I didn't feel scared at first, more like stunned, like my brain was trying to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the lightning flash resumed. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't blink out and restart. It just kept going, as if someone had hit pause and then play. The thunder rolled immediately after, a loud, bone-deep crash that made Poppy bolt off the porch. I jumped, wine glass slipping from my hand. It didn't break, just bounced in the grass. I called out for Poppy, but she was already halfway across the yard, tail down, ears pinned. She didn't stop when I called her again. I had to run after her barefoot through wet grass, all the while glancing back at the sky. But the triangle was gone. The clouds were still there, and the storm kept on. More flashes, more thunder, but nothing froze again. Nothing hovered, just regular summer weather. Poppy finally stopped near the tree line and let me grab her collar. She was shaking, panting hard. I had to coax her back to the house. I sat inside after that, lights off, just listening. The storm moved on about an hour later. The power stayed on the whole time, which I thought was odd. We usually lose it for at least a minute during big storms. I checked my phone, no alerts, no outages reported. Before I went to bed, I pulled up the security camera feed from the backyard. We've got a motion-activated cam mounted under the eaves, angled toward the yard and part of the tree line. It records in 10-second clips when it detects movement. I wasn't expecting to catch anything, really, but I was curious. There was one clip from around the right time, 8:48 p.m. The motion trigger was probably me or Poppy. I watched it, and sure enough, there I was, standing near the porch railing, facing the trees. The lightning flash goes off, and then the video freezes. Not glitches, freezes. It holds that same frame for about 10 full seconds, timestamp and all, and then resumes. You can see me jump and turn, chasing after Poppy. But the 10 seconds where the lightning was frozen, the video just stalls. No movement, no sound, just that same flash locked in the sky. I checked the feed twice more. It wasn't a corrupted file or a lag. The video recorded continuously before and after that moment. Only that one segment stalled, exactly matching the freeze I saw with my own eyes. I didn't sleep much that night. Poppy refused to leave my side. She even tried to get under the covers, which she never does. I kept thinking about the triangle. Not how it got there, but how still it was. Like it had no weight. Like it wasn't bound by anything. The next morning, I went out to the yard and looked up. Of course, the sky was clear, bright blue, hot again. Everything looked totally normal. But I couldn't stop wondering how something that big, something that strange could appear and vanish so completely, like it never happened. I didn't tell Trent when he got home the next day. I wanted to, but I knew how it'd sound. I didn't even save the video file. I just sat there and watched it a few more times, then deleted it. I figured if I kept it, I'd obsess over it. But now I kinda wish I hadn't. Poppy hasn't gone near the tree line since. Even now, she gives it a wide berth when we're out in the yard. I try not to look up when storms roll in. I was flying commercial out of Great Falls in '84. Not out of the main airport. This was a smaller regional thing, twin turboprop, old Beechcraft. We used to do little hops across the state. Billings, Lewistown, Havre, sometimes even up into Canada if the weather was good and the paperwork cleared. This wasn't any big airline, just a charter outfit out of Missoula. We moved freight sometimes, mail, sometimes just flew empty. It was quiet work, mostly. Good flying. This happened on a night run, middle of September. I remember because there'd been early snow in Kalispell the week before, and I was still kicking myself for not putting on the snow tires. I had just one crew member with me, Sam Lerner, and we were running a light cargo manifest from Great Falls to Glasgow, some sort of telecom equipment and medical supplies. It was cold and clear, which you don't always get in that part of Montana. About 10:30 p.m., when we were wheels up, we were cruising at about 9,000 feet. I had the autopilot on, just monitoring instruments and sipping burnt coffee from my thermos. Sam was behind me reading something by flashlight. We were maybe 25 miles east of Fort Benton when I first noticed the blip. It showed up on radar, about 40 miles out. At first, I thought it was just another plane on a different heading, maybe out of Havre or a military training flight from Malmstrom, but it was moving fast, way faster than any civilian plane should have been. I watched it cross 10 miles in maybe 5 seconds. I remember looking at the screen and thinking it was probably a glitch. You get the occasional false return with weather or topography, especially around the river valleys. I clicked over to the air-to-air channel and asked if anyone else was active in our corridor. Nothing. No reply. I gave it another minute or two, but the blip kept coming, dead straight. Then, just before it would have reached our approximate heading, it stopped. I don't mean it turned or banked or slowed. It stopped, midair, like hitting a wall. No arc, no bleed off. Just one frame it's moving, next frame it's fixed in place. I stared at the screen, waiting for the next sweep, thinking maybe the radar was freaking out. But it stayed right there, same coordinates, about 6,000 feet above sea level, not moving at all. I switched to the emergency frequency and keyed up a check-in. November 827 Golf, requesting status on unknown contact approximately 35 miles east-southeast of position. Something like that. I didn't get an answer, not from ATC, not from anyone, just static. Sam asked what was up, and I told him I was picking up something weird on the radar. He came up and leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the screen. I remember him saying, "That's not right." And that's about when we both saw it move. Straight up. No build, no roll, no maneuvering. The blip just shot vertically, like someone had yanked it into the sky with a rope. Gone in a second. It covered maybe 30,000 feet in that time, possibly more. I tried to rationalize it, ballistic missile, malfunctioning transponder, something bouncing off the ionosphere, but none of it held up. I watched the radar for the next 15 minutes. It didn't come back. Sam didn't say much after that. We just finished the leg in near silence aside from routine checks. I radioed the tower at Glasgow and confirmed our landing window. I didn't mention the radar contact. We stayed the night at a cheap motel by the tarmac. Sam chain-smoked outside until maybe 2 a.m., just sitting on one of those concrete parking blocks, staring at the empty sky. I didn't sleep. The next morning, we filed the standard paperwork. Nothing unusual noted. I didn't bring it up to the ground crew. I told myself there wasn't anything to say. A week later, we were back in Missoula doing short routes when someone from the charter office, a guy named Dwight, handled dispatch, called me into the back room. He'd gotten a phone call from someone at Malmstrom asking about our radar logs from the 14th. He was vague about it, but said the Air Force guy had asked if we'd seen anything unusual in the 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. window east of Fort Benton. I told him I hadn't. I don't know if Sam ever told anyone. We didn't really talk about it after that. He stayed on with the company another year before moving to Idaho. Last I heard, he was working private security at some remote lodge up north. I retired from flying in 2009, kept my logbooks, kept my FAA certs up just in case, but I don't fly anymore. I've had a few people over the years bring up UFOs or sightings or weird stuff seen from the cockpit, and I usually just smile and say I've never seen anything interesting. Most of it's junk, honestly. People see contrails and get spooked. But that thing on radar wasn't junk. I know what a malfunction looks like. I've flown through weather that knocked out transponders and blacked out screens. This wasn't that. It was clean, steady, real. I've spent a lot of nights thinking about what we saw, not even the thing itself, but how it moved, how still it was before it took off. That kind of stillness doesn't exist in the air. Nothing hovers without drift. Not even choppers. Nothing moves straight up like that without generating heat or sound or pressure waves. And nothing should have shown up on our radar like that and then just disappeared. Not at that speed, not at that altitude. Sometimes I think I should have reported it more officially. Um, Logged it in the flight debrief, called the FAA something, but there wasn't a box to check for what that was. It wasn't a drone, they didn't exist like they do now, it wasn't another aircraft, it wasn't weather, and it sure as hell wasn't a malfunction. It was just there. And then it wasn't. We were about 4 miles into the woods when it happened. This was up in northern Wisconsin around late October. Mornings were in the 30s and the leaves had mostly dropped, so the woods were wide open between the trunks. We'd camped overnight near an old logging road that runs through Nicolay, and we were out at sunrise, just me and Jared, my cousin on my mom's side. We'd grown up hunting together, so we had a rhythm to it. Slow pace, quiet as we could, even when we weren't expecting to actually get anything. Mostly it was just an excuse to be out where there's no reception and no people. I'd brought my dog, Gertie, a shepherd mix who doesn't do much tracking but sticks close and doesn't bark, which is all I care about. It was around 8 a.m., cold enough that our breath came out in clouds. Frost still clung to the tall grass in the clearings. We'd been hiking west, parallel to a stream we knew crossed some old deer trails, and just as we crested this low ridge, we saw the doe. She was standing in a thicket maybe 40 yards out, not moving, no twitching ears, no head tilt, nothing, just locked in place like a lawn ornament. Jared spotted her first and crouched low, slowly raising his hand. I did the same. Gertie sat down behind me without a sound. Normally, a deer will flinch the second it hears you, or at least track you with its ears. But she didn't budge. Her head was up, not in a listening way. Up, as in tilted all the way back. Nose pointed nearly vertical. It looked unnatural, the way her neck bent like that. At first, I thought maybe she'd scented something in the air or heard something above. But it wasn't that. Her body was frozen stiff, legs locked, eyes wide, like she was waiting. Jared whispered something I didn't catch, and when I looked over, he was staring up too. So I followed their gaze. There was nothing, just sky, pale, clear, cloudless. You could see high-altitude planes sometimes, or birds, or even the shimmer of sun off frost, but there was nothing. It wasn't just empty. It felt wrong. No breeze, no bugs, no birdsong. Total silence except for this dull pressure in my ears like when you're just about to yawn. I whispered, "Do you hear anything?" And Jared didn't answer. He just kept looking up. Then I noticed Gertie had laid down, not in a relaxed way, flat to the ground, chin on her paws, ears flattened. I reached back and touched her neck. She was warm but shaking. That's when the light changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a shift in tone, like someone dimmed the sun a notch. The shadows stayed the same, but everything looked flatter, cooler, almost like dusk, but the sun hadn't moved. Jared muttered, "That's not right," and finally lowered his eyes. The doe was still staring upward. We watched her for maybe another full minute, not speaking. Then, out of nowhere, she turned and bolted. No warning, no tail flick, just spun and ran full tilt back into the trees, crashing through brush like something was chasing her. But we didn't hear anything else, no rustling from any predator, no movement at all. Just her disappearing into the woods. I should have felt relieved, like, okay, she's gone, nothing's out there. But I didn't. The air felt too still. The whole clearing felt like it had been emptied of sound. You could feel the silence. It pressed down on your skin. Jared whispered, "Let's head back." I didn't argue. We moved quick, not quite running, but not careful either. Crunching over leaves, snapping twigs. Didn't matter if we scared off anything. We weren't trying to hunt anymore. We just wanted to get out of that part of the forest. About 10 minutes later, the sounds started coming back. First a crow in the distance, then squirrels. Wind picked up. Everything felt lighter. Gertie stood and shook herself like she was waking up. Jared let out this half laugh, like he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. We didn't say much after that. Got back to camp, made coffee, packed up. We told ourselves it was probably just some weird atmospheric thing, maybe a thermal or some pressure shift messing with the animals. But I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. That patch of sky where we were all looking felt like a blank, like there was a hole up there. Not black, not cloudy, just nothing. And everything around it seemed to pause until whatever it was moved on. It happened 3 winters ago on a Tuesday night. I was living alone at the time, renting a house on the outskirts of Butte, Montana, close enough to town for work, but far enough that you could walk into your backyard and not see another porch light. The place backed up to some old Forest Service land, mostly pine and rock. Quiet. I liked it that way. I was working nights back then, doing snowplow contracts for the city. Shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until the roads were clear, usually sometime around dawn. That particular night, though, they'd canceled the rotation because the storm we were expecting never hit. Roads stayed dry, so I had the night off. I stayed in, made a frozen pizza, fed my dog, Buster, a mutt that looked like a golden retriever mixed with something scrappier. I watched half a hockey game, then turned in early. I remember checking my phone one last time before I plugged it in and set it on the nightstand. No missed calls, no messages. Just 10:43 p.m. and that little lightning bolt icon showing it was charging. I woke up once, sometime around 2 a.m., because Buster growled. Not loud, just a low, rumbling grumble from his bed at the foot of mine. He didn't bark or stand up. He just growled like he smelled something off. I told him to knock it off half asleep and rolled over. Figured he heard a deer out near the tree line. The next morning, I got up around 7, took Buster out for a quick walk, then made coffee. I noticed my phone had a voicemail notification, which was weird because the signal at my house was pretty spotty and I usually didn't get missed calls unless I drove back into town. But sure enough, there it was, one new voicemail. No missed call attached to it, no number listed, just unknown. I listened to it on speaker while standing in the kitchen holding my mug. It was 45 seconds long. The first part was just this low humming noise, real deep, like when you're near high voltage lines or a big transformer, that steady, low frequency vibration. But underneath it, there was this soft, grainy static, like a bad radio station. No voices at first, no clicks, just hum and static. About 30 seconds in, I heard it. My name. Whispered, not once. Plain as day. Connor. Pause. Connor. Same voice both times. Male. Quiet but clear, not emotional, not threatening, just saying my name like they were checking to see if I was listening. Then nothing, just the hum fading out into silence. I played it again, same thing. No distortion, no skips. The voicemail hadn't glitched, it was just like that. I checked the timestamp, 2:13 a.m. That's when I remembered Buster growling. I looked around, kind of half expecting to find something wrong in the house, but everything was normal. Doors locked, no windows open, no footprints outside but mine and Buster's. I deleted the voicemail. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to have it saved. I figured it had to be some kind of prank, maybe a spoofed number. But the fact that there was no call record at all, just the voicemail, bothered me. I checked my call log, even went online to my phone account later that day. Nothing logged for 2:13 a.m. That night, I stayed up later than usual, watching dumb TV with the volume too high. Buster stayed near me more than normal, which he only did when it stormed or something spooked him. Around midnight, he went to the sliding door and stared out into the yard for a full 5 minutes, ears up, body stiff. But he didn't bark. I got up and looked too. Nothing out there, just snow and dark and trees. 2 nights later, I got another voicemail. Same number, unknown, same time of night, 2:09 a.m. This one was shorter, only about 20 seconds. Mostly static this time with these weird distant clicks, like tapping on glass. Then, near the end, something like breathing, just one long, slow inhale. That's it. No voice, no name. I didn't delete that one right away. I kept it for a few hours, played it 3 or 4 times like I was trying to hear something more in it. I even held the phone to Buster to see if he'd react. He did. As soon as the static started, his ears flattened and he walked out of the room. I deleted it before bed. That weekend, I drove up to Missoula to stay with my sister for a couple nights. I told her work had been slow and I wanted a change of scenery, but really, I just didn't want to be at the house alone. I didn't get any voicemails while I was there. My phone stayed quiet. When I got back, I walked the property again. Nothing out of place, no tracks, no signs of anyone messing around. My landlord lived 2 hours away and never came out unless something broke, and I didn't know anyone close enough to think they'd be messing with me. The last thing happened maybe a week later. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I was sitting in the living room, lights low, just kind of scrolling through nothing on my phone. Buster was asleep on the rug. Everything was quiet. Then the humming started, but not from the phone. It was outside, low, steady, pulsing, like it was coming from above the house, but not loud enough to rattle anything, just barely audible. I stood up and listened. It wasn't the heater or the fridge. It wasn't the power lines. It was deeper, and it didn't seem to echo. I slid the back door open and stepped onto the deck. The sky was clear, stars everywhere, cold air, no wind. I stood there barefoot, straining to hear. The hum just stopped. No fade out, no Doppler, just gone. I looked up and realized the stars above the tree line were gone. Not behind clouds, just missing. There was this patch of sky, maybe the size of my outstretched hand, where nothing showed, just flat black. I blinked and squinted and waited, and after maybe 10 seconds, the stars came back. Not all at once, one by one, like something had moved. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much for a while after. No more voicemails came through. I changed my number anyway. I kept Buster close. I stayed out of the woods. I never reported anything because there wasn't anything to report. Just a couple recordings and a sky that went blank for a few seconds. I still don't know who or what said my name. I was 17 that summer. My Uncle Lou had a cabin near Lake Crescent in Washington, and he let me stay there for a few weeks while he was off in Montana, helping a friend with some kind of logging work. I just finished junior year, didn't really have any plans, so the idea of a quiet place in the woods where I could hike and fish sounded good. Plus, my mom liked the idea of me being offline for a bit. The cabin's tucked about 3 miles off Highway 101, just a little thing with a propane stove, no Wi-Fi, and a busted old TV that only picked up one channel if you turned the antenna just right. There's a rainwater tank and a composting toilet, so it's livable, but not exactly comfortable. I didn't mind. Most days, I just took long hikes along the Forest Service roads or wandered deeper into the woods where there weren't any trails. I liked getting lost a little. I'd pack a peanut butter sandwich, a water bottle, and my pocket knife, and just pick a direction. There's something about being totally alone out there. No cars, no people, no voices, just birds and the crunch of leaves and the smell of pine sap. This happened on July 13th. I remember because it was one of the hotter days, and I'd taken a trail up along a ridge that gave a good view of the lake. I'd been walking maybe 4 hours total, taking my time, and I was getting low on water. I figured I'd start heading back toward the cabin. Instead of retracing my steps, I cut across a slope and tried to drop down into the next valley to meet up with the old logging road that led home. That's when I found the clearing. I wasn't really looking for it. It just opened up in front of me after I pushed through a wall of ferns. It was maybe 20 feet across, mostly flat, with no trees inside, just dirt and dead grass. What stopped me was how dark the ground was. At first, I thought it was just damp from shade, but when I stepped into it, it crunched under my boots like dry leaves. I crouched down and touched the dirt with the back of my hand. It was warm. Not sun-warmed, but like the inside of a car seat that's been sitting too long, deeper, almost unnatural heat. But the weirdest part was the air. I stood up and felt this cold hit my face. Not wind, just a patch of freezing air right above the center of the clearing. I reached my arm up slowly, and my hand went from warm to cold like I'd stuck it in a freezer. The hairs on my arm stood up. I moved it around. There was no breeze, just a bubble of cold hanging there. I waved both arms through it and even felt a little lightheaded, like I'd gotten altitude sickness for a second. I looked around for any sign of a fire or a burn scar, but there wasn't any ash. The grass was blackened and dead in a perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, but not charred. It looked cooked, not burned. Nothing was smoking, no signs of tire tracks, no footprints besides mine. I got spooked and stepped back. I don't know why, it just suddenly felt wrong to be in that clearing. like I'd stepped onto something that wasn't supposed to be there anymore. I didn't hear anything. The woods were dead silent. Even the flies were gone. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and that faint crunch of my boots on brittle grass. I started back toward the ridge, keeping my eyes on the ground in case there were more patches like it. But the forest looked normal again. I didn't see anything else strange on the way down. It was around 5:30 when I got back to the cabin. I remember because I checked my phone as soon as I got inside. I hadn't checked the time at all on the hike, and I was surprised at how late it was. It didn't feel like I'd been gone that long. My sandwich was still in my bag, untouched. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air felt too still. I kept hearing this faint hum. I thought maybe it was the fridge or the battery inverter, but when I turned everything off, the hum stayed. Not loud, just barely there, like a low vibration under the floorboards. I went outside to pee around midnight and noticed something strange over the trees to the west. A glow. Not moonlight. The moon had already set. This was faint, but it didn't blink or flicker like a plane. It was just a soft, pale green smear behind the treetops. I watched it for maybe 5 minutes. It never moved. I finally went back inside. The next day I hiked back to the clearing. I figured I'd try to get some pictures and maybe take a soil sample. Not that I knew what to do with it, but I thought maybe I could show my science teacher back home. When I got to where I thought the clearing had been, it wasn't there. Same ferns, same trees, same ridge behind me, but the open space was gone. It was just normal undergrowth. I walked in circles for almost an hour, trying to line things up from memory. I knew I was in the right area. I even found a broken branch I remembered stepping over the day before. But the clearing wasn't there. No patch of scorched grass, no cold spot, just dense forest. I gave up and went back, feeling weirdly embarrassed, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But that night I had a dream, or something like a dream, where I was back in the clearing, only it was darker, and there was this sound like dry leaves blowing across metal. The sky above the trees wasn't black. It was this soft glowing gray, like backlit fog. I woke up sweating. I could still hear the sound for a few seconds after I opened my eyes. I didn't go hiking again after that. Not deep, anyway. I stuck to the gravel roads and stayed close to the cabin. A few days later, I heard a loud whump in the middle of the night, like something heavy had landed nearby. But when I went out with a flashlight, nothing was there. Just quiet woods and wet pine needles. My uncle got back a week later, and I didn't say anything. Not then. He would have just laughed it off. But I did ask if there were any sinkholes or hot springs nearby, and he said no. Just dirt and trees out there, he told me. Nothing interesting. When I got home, I checked satellite maps of the area, tried to match where I'd been with the shapes in the trees, but the photos were old, and I couldn't line anything up. I even tried going back with a friend the next summer, but it never felt the same. The trail looked familiar, but the woods were just woods. I still think about that cold patch, the way it just hovered there like it didn't belong to the rest of the air, like something had just left. We were camping out near Joshua Tree, out in the desert, about 20 miles from the nearest small town. I'd never been before, and neither had my girlfriend, Sarah. We'd driven out in her old Subaru, packed with camping gear, a couple of folding chairs, a cooler with sandwiches, water, some beers, and a small tent we'd borrowed from my brother. The plan was just to get away for a couple of nights, no cell service, no distractions, just stars and quiet. The first night was fine. Maybe a little colder than we expected, but that's desert nights for you. We set up the tent on a flat patch near a cluster of Joshua trees, not too close to the road, but close enough to find if we needed to bail. The spot was perfect, dark, quiet, and the sky was incredible. We laid outside on a blanket for hours, just staring up at the stars, talking about dumb stuff. The Milky Way was so clear it looked like someone spilled glitter all across the sky. We both passed out around midnight. The tent zipper was closed tight and the car was locked up. Sarah double-checked the doors before we went inside, even locked the gas cap just to be safe. The keys were zipped inside the tent with us, so no way anyone else could have gotten to the car without waking us. Around 3:15 a.m., I woke up because the night air had shifted. It was cooler and quieter, but also felt heavier. Hard to explain. I wasn't totally awake, just enough to be aware. Sarah was still sleeping, deep. The first thing I noticed was a faint clicking sound, like the car's locks or doors. I figured maybe it was the wind, though there wasn't much breeze at all. Then I heard it again, the distinct sound of a car door opening. I sat up and blinked toward the edge of the tent. I could make out the silhouette of the car parked maybe 15 feet away. All the doors were wide open. Every single one. Driver's side, passenger side, back doors. Just hanging there, like someone had gone through and opened them all at once. The headlights and interior lights were off, which made it look even weirder, like the car had been left mid-use, but without anyone inside. I froze. The keys were zipped in with us. There was no way the doors could have unlocked by themselves, especially all of them. I gently shook Sarah awake and whispered about it. She was groggy, but got up fast when she saw the car. We looked around, called out a little, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. The desert was dead quiet, except for the occasional distant coyote howl. No other cars had driven by, and the road was empty. I grabbed my flashlight and checked inside the car. Nothing was missing. The doors all still unlocked, but no sign anyone had been inside or near it. No trash or cigarette butts, no scent of smoke or perfume or anything unfamiliar. The only thing strange was the dirt on the ground around the car. There were no footprints. Not one. The sand was undisturbed except for where our car was parked. Sarah wanted to close the doors and lock everything back up, but I hesitated. I felt this weird pull, like the air around us had changed since I woke up. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and the desert that had felt vast and open now felt small and too quiet, like something was watching. We zipped the tent back up tight, sat on our sleeping bags, and waited for sunrise. We kept checking the car doors from inside. None of them moved again. Morning came, and the sun was just rising behind a line of low hills. When the light hit the car, it looked normal. No dents, no scratches, no signs of damage or forced entry. I started the engine, and it fired up fine, like nothing had happened. That day, we tried to shake it off, but the feeling stuck with me. We spent the afternoon hiking near Skull Rock and trying to act normal, but every time I glanced back at the car, I had this nagging sense that whatever had been out there, it wasn't human. The second night, we stayed inside the tent from sunset on. I kept hearing faint noises outside, small rustling sounds like footsteps on gravel or a branch snapping. But every time I shined the flashlight out, there was nothing but empty desert. Before we left the next morning, I checked the car again. This time, the glove box was slightly open. I'm pretty sure I closed it the night before. I closed it and locked the doors myself, then double-checked the tent zipper. We didn't see anyone. No one followed us out. The strange part was how the whole thing felt like it shouldn't have happened, but it did, and no one else could explain it. The car, the tent, the quiet desert night. Doors open with no footprints, no sign of forced entry, and cold air that didn't belong. I keep thinking maybe it was just a weird wind pattern or an animal messing with the locks, but that doesn't explain the doors all open and the silence afterward. I've never told many people because it sounds crazy, but it's the only time I've felt something really strange out there under the stars where nothing else should have been. It was a Wednesday, early March. I'd just gotten home from work around 6:40 p.m., usual commute. I live in this small neighborhood in central Illinois, kind of a grid of one-story houses with big trees and quiet streets. It had rained earlier, so the ground was still wet, and the air had that smell like wet pavement and old leaves. The sky was this dull gray blue, still a little light out, but fading fast. I was letting my dog, Penny, out into the backyard. She's a 7-year-old rescue mutt, some kind of shepherd mix with this big patch of white fur on her chest. She likes to sniff around the fence line before she does her business. I was just standing on the back steps, kind of zoning out, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up, and there was this plane. At least, that's what I thought it was at first. It had that long, narrow silhouette, with wings that stretched out flat and little blinking lights on either end. It was directly above the neighborhood, maybe 3 or 4 blocks to the west, maybe a couple 100 feet up. Not super high, but it wasn't moving. That was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't moving. Just completely still, like it had been paused mid-flight. No sound either, not even a low hum or distant engine noise. Everything else was quiet too. I remember that part clearly. No wind, no cars driving by, even the birds had gone quiet. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to do something, move forward, turn, rise, anything. But it just hovered there, totally motionless. It wasn't a helicopter, I know what those look like. This was shaped like a commercial jet, but smaller. Maybe like one of those private commuter planes. I watched it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes before pulling out my phone. I figured it was probably some kind of drone or weird angle, but I opened one of those flight tracker apps just out of curiosity. I zoomed in on my location, let it load. Nothing. No planes overhead, not within several miles actually. The nearest one was a cargo flight passing way south of us. I refreshed the app, still nothing. I even switched to another flight tracker, same thing. No planes, no aircraft of any kind near my house. By then, Penny had finished sniffing around and came back up the steps, but I didn't go inside. I just stood there staring up at this frozen plane. It had this weird light under it, not super bright, just this faint white glow, like a porch light seen through fog. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed on. I tried taking a video, but it didn't come out well. The phone couldn't focus right in the low light, and the zoom made everything blurry. All you could see was this little speck above the tree line. Nothing that'd convince anyone. After about 10 minutes, I went inside and got my binoculars from the hall closet. I've used them before at Cubs games, so they're decent, not super fancy, but good enough to see detail. When I looked through them, that's when I got really confused. It wasn't just hovering, it was dead still. No sway, no tilt, no indication of movement. I could see the shape clearer now. 2 wings, tail fin, small body. It didn't have any airline logos or markings I could make out. Just this flat gray color. Too big to be a drone, but too small for a major airline. No windows I could see either, just smooth. Around the 15-minute mark, it suddenly started moving. No sound, no shift, just it started gliding forward, slow at first, then faster. It headed north, climbed a little, and then faded into the clouds. It didn't accelerate like a jet taking off. It moved more like it was being pulled. No dip, no turbulence, just a perfect arc out of view. I stood there holding the binoculars for a while, just trying to process it. I felt this strange mix of unease and not fear exactly, but like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. Something out of step, like watching a glitch. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how quiet it had been and how nothing on the apps showed anything. I even checked archived radar data the next morning, trying to see if maybe there'd been a low-flying plane not picked up by the trackers, but there was nothing. I asked my neighbor Dan the next day if he'd noticed anything. He's retired, lives across the street, always out on his porch around sunset. He just kind of shrugged and said, "Thought I saw a helicopter or something, but didn't hear it, so figured I imagined it." That's all he said. I didn't push it. I kept thinking maybe it was some military thing, but we're nowhere near a base, and I've never seen anything like that around here before or since. Whatever it was, it didn't behave like anything I know. And the silence, that was the part that stuck with me the most. Not even the usual background noise, just dead still. It hasn't happened again. But now I catch myself looking up a lot more than I used to. We were about an hour outside of Laramie, Wyoming, heading south on Route 287. It was late, just past midnight, cold and clear, mid-November. My wife Carly was asleep in the passenger seat, and our daughter June was dozing in her car seat behind me. The only other noise was our dog, Hopper, shifting occasionally in the back cargo area, letting out these soft, half-sigh, half-growl sounds like he does when he's dreaming. We were coming back from Carly's sister's place in Bozeman. It took longer than we planned getting out of there, so instead of splitting the drive over 2 days like usual, we just decided to push through. I didn't mind the night drive. Roads were empty, just a few trucks every 20 minutes. I was maybe 15 minutes north of the Colorado border when it started. The stretch of highway there is straight, real straight, for miles. You can see the road cutting through the hills way ahead of you. No towns, no lights. Just fences, open fields, and those bare little butts in the distance. I remember checking the clock, 12:12. I remember that specifically because right after I glanced at the time, I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, just off the shoulder, standing still, facing the road. That's not all that unusual. There's ranches scattered all over that area, and sometimes you'll see people out checking fence lines, even at night. But this one didn't move, didn't have a flashlight or reflectors, just stood there. I slowed a little, maybe from 65 to 50, not sure why. Instinct, maybe. My brights were already on, but the figure didn't light up like you'd expect. You know how someone will glow a little in headlights, even just their skin or shoes or something reflective? This didn't. It stayed in shadow until we were maybe 100 yards away, and then it was gone. Not like it ducked or moved, just wasn't there anymore. 1 second it was standing maybe 2 feet from the white line, and then the headlights passed over that exact spot, and there was nothing. Empty grass and dirt and fence. I remember leaning forward, squinting, trying to catch anything. Maybe it had stepped back or dropped down. But there was no motion. Carly stirred a little, but didn't wake up. I kept driving. Another 5 minutes went by. I'd almost convinced myself it was a fence post or a weird shadow. Then I saw it again, same side of the road, maybe another mile up, standing in the same way, still facing the road. Only this time, something about it looked off. It was tall, taller than before, or maybe just closer. But the head seemed too small, the shoulders too narrow. I don't know how else to put it. It looked like someone tried to draw a person from memory, but got the proportions wrong. Again, I slowed, this time to maybe 40. And again, just before we got close enough for the brights to really hit it, it was gone. Just gone. One frame it was there, the next, it wasn't. I felt this pressure in my chest. Not panic exactly, but something tight. I checked the mirror. Nothing behind us. I tapped the brakes a few times just to hear the sound. Carly shifted and murmured something like, "We home?" And I said, "Not yet." She went back to sleep. Hopper let out a low whine then, and I glanced back. He was sitting up now, facing the rear window, ears forward. He doesn't usually do that unless there's an animal nearby. About 2 miles later, I saw the figure again. This time on the opposite side. Left shoulder, maybe 20 feet off the road in a shallow ditch. Same posture, same stillness, but this time I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and passed it. I tried not to look, but I caught a flash of it out the driver's side window as we passed. Just enough to see that the limbs looked too long, like the arms hung lower than they should, and the legs seemed to bend the wrong way at the knee. That's when Hopper started barking. Loud, frantic barks, nothing like his usual huffing. June woke up and started crying, and Carly jolted awake, looking around, confused. I told her everything was fine, even though my hands were white-knuckling the wheel. I didn't want to stop, not even to calm the dog or settle the baby. I just kept driving. The next 20 minutes were quiet. No more figures, no cars, nothing but the low hum of the engine and Carly trying to get June back to sleep. We crossed into Colorado around 12:45. There's a little green sign that marks it, and that's when I let myself breathe a little. But 2 miles past that sign, just outside a bend near Owl Creek, there it was again. Dead center in the road. It didn't move. Just stood there. Same height. Same wrong proportions. Right in our lane. I swerved left, hard, tires screaming, went halfway into the oncoming lane, thank God there was no one coming, and missed it by inches. Or maybe there was nothing to miss. Because as soon as the headlights hit where it should have been, there was just pavement. Nothing else. Carly screamed. Hopper lost it again. June was sobbing now. I pulled over a few hundred yards later, breathing hard, hands shaking. Carly was yelling, "What the hell was that? Did you fall asleep?" And I just kept saying, "I saw something. I saw it." We sat there for a long time, engine running, hazard lights on. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror. Hopper stayed rigid, tail down, growling at the back window. Eventually, Carly took the wheel. I rode passenger the rest of the way to Fort Collins. We didn't talk much. I drove that stretch of 287 again a few months later during the day. Nothing unusual about it. No weird landmarks, no ditches or trees where someone could hide, just a long, empty road through the hills. Same as always. But I haven't driven it at night since. I was out behind my aunt's cabin in northern Arizona, up near Alpine. High elevation, pretty remote, not much out there besides ponderosa pines and long stretches of nothing. I'd been staying a few days while she was visiting friends in Oregon. I was mostly just houses sitting and getting some quiet time in. I work remotely, so it was nice to be offline, no traffic, no neighbors yelling. That night was supposed to be the peak of the Perseid meteor shower. I'd read about it earlier that week, and since the skies were perfectly clear and there's almost zero light pollution out there, I figured I'd try to get some photos. I brought my DSLR and tripod out to the back slope a little after 10. It's a good spot. There's this old wooden bench up on a little rise that overlooks the forest. Quiet, cold, but not freezing. I had a fleece and thermos and a small LED lantern I clipped to the bench for soft light. The first few shots were pretty standard. Long exposures, lots of stars, the occasional faint streak. I was facing northeast, toward the widest patch of open sky I could find through the trees. The camera was running, interval timer going, and I was just sitting there, watching. Around 10:40 or so, I noticed one of the lights in the sky wasn't acting like the others. At first, I thought it was just a plane. It was moving slowly, not blinking like a commercial aircraft, though. And it wasn't following any of the usual flight paths I was used to seeing when I lived in Phoenix. It didn't have that red-green navigation light pattern. It was more of a solid white, but every now and then it would pulse. Not flicker, but shift, like change hue slightly. White to pale blue, then white again. Once, I swear it turned a light yellow. It wasn't fast either. It drifted. I thought maybe it was a satellite, but satellites don't usually stop. This did. It paused in the sky, maybe for 10 seconds, maybe longer, just hung there, dead still. I took a few pictures while it was stationary. The exposures turned out blurry, which was weird since everything else in the frame was sharp. Even when I braced the camera, it came out smudged. Then it started to move again, but this time not sideways, down. It descended in a slow, smooth line, almost like a drop of water sliding down glass. No arc, no tilt, straight down. It faded as it dropped. Not like it was getting dimmer from distance, more like it was sinking behind something. Only there was nothing there. No clouds, no horizon, just trees way down below. Then it vanished. I waited, thinking maybe it would pop back up. Maybe it had been a drone. But who would be flying a drone out here that high up, that late? I checked my watch. It was 10:56. Hopper barked once from inside the cabin. I froze for a second, listened. He didn't bark again, which meant he wasn't alarmed. Just reacting to some noise, probably a deer or something. Still, I packed up the camera. Didn't feel like hanging around outside anymore. On the walk back, maybe 50 feet from the tree line, I heard a thud. Not loud, not sharp, just a heavy drop like something landing in grass. I turned around fast, heart in my throat, but saw nothing. The slope behind me was empty. No animals, no wind. The lantern on the bench was still glowing steady. I picked up the pace, got inside, locked the door. Later, I went through the photos. Most were stars, the occasional streak, but a few from that 10-minute stretch showed a faint blur in the sky. The one I'd seen moving. It wasn't shaped like anything, just a round glow. No hard edges. But in one of the last frames, there was something strange in the bottom corner. I almost missed it. It looked like a small glint, almost a reflection, way too low to be a star, just above the tree line. I zoomed in. It wasn't shaped like the light in the sky, more like a flat spot, not a perfect circle, not a plane, just this pale oval with a faint tail under it, like a smudge of vapor. I don't know what it was. I haven't used that bench since. I was working a contract job outside of Montpelier, Vermont, a private land survey for this retired couple who bought a few hundred acres of mixed forest and pasture. They wanted to clear space for a new driveway and maybe a future guest cabin, so they needed a topographic map of the elevation and tree cover. Pretty straightforward gig. I do most of that stuff solo now, with a Phantom 4 drone, GPS base station, and some mapping software. Usually takes a few days depending on acreage and terrain. Their land was mostly gentle hills, nothing too dense except for this one stretch of older forest along the western edge. That's where things got weird. First day went fine. I got all the ground control points set up and ran a few test flights to check the satellite lock. It was overcast but no wind, and the signal quality was solid. No power lines, no cell towers nearby. The drone held altitude, battery voltage was stable. Nothing unusual. But when I flew the northern half of the property on the second day, specifically when the drone crossed over this patch of older trees near a dried up creek bed, the data started acting up. I didn't notice it at first. Everything looked normal on the live feed. The drone didn't lose signal or drift. But when I uploaded the flight logs to my software later, I saw the altitude values dipping by 40 to 50 feet, even though the drone never actually dropped. It was like the elevation suddenly spiked in that one spot, but there was no terrain change to justify it. I thought maybe I messed up the ground control points or accidentally logged the wrong base station data. So I recalibrated everything the next morning and flew it again. Same exact thing happened. The drone would cross that one patch and the telemetry would go screwy. Altitude readings dropped sharply, then corrected once it moved past the tree line. The drone didn't seem to react. It didn't descend or autocorrect. Just flew like normal. But the log said otherwise. I tried switching to manual flight and hovered over the same spot at 200 feet. Watched it real time from the field. The drone stayed level. But on the tablet, the reported altitude started dropping. 200, then 164, then 133. Like it thought it was sinking, even though it clearly wasn't. When I moved it back, the numbers corrected. I did it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Same results each pass. I figured it had to be a GPS multipath issue, maybe reflections from dense tree cover confusing the satellite signal. That happens sometimes near cliffs or buildings. But this wasn't a canyon or anything, just old pines, maybe 80, 90 feet tall. No metal, no water to bounce signals. And that afternoon, I walked the area on foot. I had my Trimble unit and a handheld barometer just to double-check elevation manually. Nothing strange on the ground. The slope was gentle and the barometric pressure stayed constant, but it was weirdly quiet out there. No wind, no bird song, just still. There was a half-collapsed wooden blind maybe 50 feet off the trail. Looked like a deer stand from way back, rotted through and leaning against a tree. Didn't think much of it at the time. I marked the coordinates and decided to fly again later with a different unit. I had an old backup drone in the truck, a Mavic Air. Not ideal for surveying, but good enough to test basic telemetry. Launched it around 6:30 p.m., just before sunset. It behaved the same way. Altitude data got scrambled in the exact same spot, even with a different drone and fresh GPS lock. I brought it back and stood staring at the trees for a while. There wasn't any visible interference, no power sources, no antennas. The sky was completely clear. That night, back at the motel, I dug into the flight logs and overlaid the error zones. The irregularities always started within a 200-foot radius of that creek bed. Latitude and longitude held steady, but the elevation dropped erratically. Sometimes the software flagged it as a GPS inconsistency. Sometimes it just left the numbers blank. Out of curiosity, I pulled up some old USGS maps of the area. Nothing special on them, just labeled as mixed forest. But when I zoomed out, I saw that the property line cut right along a weird U-shaped depression that wasn't on the newer topo data. Almost like an old landslide or sink that had been erased by vegetation over time. I don't know why, but that bugged me. Like the drone sensors were reacting to something the maps weren't showing. Next day, I asked the owners, Derek and Lucy, if they knew anything about that part of the land. They just kind of shrugged and said they hadn't explored it much. Lucy mentioned their dog, an old hound named Kobe, avoided that stretch. She said he'd whine and freeze up if they got too close, which I guess is common with older dogs and unfamiliar terrain. But still, I went back out that afternoon. No drone this time, just hiked in with the GPS, camera, and my notepad. I followed the same trail to the creek bed. Still no wind, still too quiet. At one point I realized I hadn't heard a single bird or insect the whole walk. I stood in the center of that hollow, just letting it sink in. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't fear exactly. Just this sense that something was off kilter, like the ground wasn't as solid as it looked. I stayed maybe 10 minutes just taking photos. Tree trunks, canopy gaps, soil, everything looked normal. Then I turned to leave and saw a shape through the trees. Not big, just movement. I figured it was a deer or something, but when I stepped closer, there was nothing there. No sound, no tracks. Just that same hush. On the way back, I tried using the Trimble to get a height profile of the walk, but the unit froze twice and had to be restarted. That never happens. Battery was full, memory clear, no reason for it. I didn't go back after that. I had enough usable data to finish the job by avoiding that zone entirely. I handed off the survey to Derek 2 days later and didn't mention any of it. About a week after I got home, I got a call from Lucy. She sounded kind of sheepish. Asked if I'd ever flown the drone over their western woods at night. I told her no, not at night, and she said she and Derek had seen lights moving through the trees just before dawn. Slow, steady, like someone hiking with a headlamp but higher off the ground. She said Kobe growled all morning and wouldn't eat. Just sat by the window facing that side of the property. I didn't know what to say. We hung up after a minute or two. I haven't had another job out there since. I still have the flight logs saved. Every now and then I open them, just to look. The altitude data is still glitched. No matter how many times I reprocess it, the numbers drop where they shouldn't. I'd been driving back from my cousin Lyle's place in Green River. He'd called me last minute to help move some old furniture out of his shed, and I didn't have anything better to do that weekend. So I drove out Saturday morning, stayed until Sunday evening, had dinner, then hit the road a little after 7. It's about a 4-hour drive back to my place in Delta if you take the 2 lanes, Highway 6 most of the way. Not much traffic at night, but not much light either. Mostly farms and open land, with long stretches of nothing between. I was maybe halfway through the drive when I started to feel that kind of tired where your eyes burn and your thoughts loop. I remember glancing at the clock. It was 9:46, and thinking I'd pull over at the next rest area. I'd had coffee with dinner, but not much water, and my head was starting to throb. There's this little pull-off near a grain silo east of Lindell. Not an official rest stop, but there's enough room to park without being in the road. That's where I stopped. Just planned to sit for a few minutes, maybe close my eyes. I left the engine running so the heater would stay on. I remember that clearly. It was cold, even for April. The temp had dropped fast after sunset. Next thing I knew, my phone was buzzing in the cup holder. Screen said 11:13. I blinked hard, trying to figure out what day it was. The car was still running. Lights on, heater humming. My seatbelt was off, which was weird because I hadn't unbuckled it. The weirdest part, though, was how disoriented I felt. Not groggy like I dozed off, but out of place. Like walking into a room you've never seen before and being told it's yours. I sat there for a few seconds, breathing slow, trying to work through it. My chest felt tight. Not pain, exactly. More like something wasn't sitting right. I looked around. Nothing outside. Just black fields and a strip of road under the high beams. No cars had passed while I was sitting there, far as I could tell. I reached for my phone again and pulled up the dashcam app. It records continuously whenever the engine's on, and I figured if I'd nodded off, I could at least see if anything happened around the car while I was out. The footage started normally. I watched myself pulling off the highway and stopping, setting the parking brake. Timestamp said 9:52. I fidgeted with the vents, checked my phone, then I just sat still. At 10:03, the feed cut to static. Not a frozen frame, not black, actual visual static, like a TV with no signal. It stayed that way until 11:09, then came back abruptly. No transition, just straight from static to live footage of me flinching awake. I played it back 3 times, same thing every time. I know it sounds dumb, but I started scanning the inside of the car, under the seat, the back floor, the trunk, looking for, I don't even know what, something to explain it. A prank maybe, but everything was untouched. My bag was still on the passenger seat, nothing missing, nothing moved. I opened the door and stepped out. Cold hit hard. The air had that dry, charged feel like before a storm, but the sky was clear. Stars were out, sharp and steady. No sound except the engine idling and a few crickets. I walked around the car, letting my eyes adjust. The gravel beneath the tires was disturbed, like I'd rolled forward slightly, but I know I set the brake. I always do, even on flat ground. It wasn't like the car had moved far, maybe a couple feet, but still. That's when I noticed the smell. Not strong, not bad, just off. Like warm plastic or ozone. Hard to pin down, but it wasn't there earlier. I bent down near the front grille, thinking maybe something had burned in the engine, but there was no smoke, no warning lights on the dash. I shut the engine off and stood there in the quiet for a minute. Everything looked normal. Nothing in the fields, just dead corn stalks and dry grass. I got back in and restarted the car. The heater kicked on again and I checked the time, 11:17. I'd lost over an hour and I had no memory of it. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Made it in around 1:30. Didn't sleep. Just sat on the couch with the lights on, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. Next morning, I uploaded the dashcam footage to my laptop to take another look. This time, I tried scrubbing through frame by frame right before the static started. Right at 10:258, there was a single frame that didn't match the rest. It looked like a flash, not lens flare, not a reflection. Just this burst of white filling the left edge of the screen, almost like something lit up the whole field beside the car for a split second, then static. I haven't deleted the footage. I don't watch it anymore either. I don't park on that side of the highway now, not even to stretch my legs. It started just after 2 a.m. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, which wasn't unusual. The window was cracked open. It was early June, one of those still, warm nights that never fully cool off. We live in a small town in southern Illinois called Oakley Junction. About 1,500 people, mostly farmland and woods. Not much happens here, which is why the sound yanked me upright like a shot. The tornado siren. It blared once, loud and long, then cut off. Just a single burst. Long enough to make my chest tighten, but short enough I wondered if I imagined it. I sat there a second, waiting for the next one, but it didn't come. I checked my phone. No weather alerts, no amber alerts, nothing. The sky was clear, not a cloud in it. I even stepped out onto the porch barefoot, phone in one hand, looking up. Stars everywhere. The streetlights were still on. Everything looked normal. I was about to chalk it up to a test glitch when I heard it. This low humming sound. Not mechanical, more like pressure in the air, like when you're under high voltage lines or near a big substation. Hard to explain. You couldn't tell where it came from. It just was. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Not loud, but constant, steady. I thought maybe it was tinnitus for a second, but when I cupped my ears, it stayed the same. A couple houses down, I saw porch lights flick on, movement behind curtains. So I knew I wasn't the only one hearing it. My neighbor across the street, Hank Dunley, stepped outside in a bathrobe, scratching his head. He looked over at me and raised his eyebrows like, "You hearing this too?" I nodded, and then the lights cut out. Not just the street lights, all of it. Total blackout. Everything went silent for half a second, like the town just got unplugged. Then the humming surged louder. Not painfully, but it pressed on your chest, like standing too close to an idling engine the size of a house. I called back into the house for Kendra, my wife. She came out groggy, rubbing her eyes. I told her something weird was going on. She didn't say anything, just stood next to me, arms folded, eyes scanning the sky. The weirdest part was how calm everything looked. No wind, no flickering. Just that steady hum and the absence of light. People started coming out of their houses, not panicked, just confused. Quiet. No one was yelling or turning on flashlights. It felt like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Rudy, the guy who runs the auto shop near the corner, came jogging down the street in his slippers. He kept looking up, then down, like trying to catch something in the sky. He stopped near our mailbox and said, "Do you feel it under your feet?" I hadn't noticed, but now that he said it, yeah, the pavement had this faint vibration. Subtle, like a bass note from far off. I went back inside to grab my radio, an old battery-powered one we kept under the sink. I turned the dial, scanned AM, FM, even weather bands, all static. No chatter, no white noise, just dead air. Then, maybe 10 minutes after the first siren, it started again. The siren. This time it didn't stop. A full wail, the kind you hear before a tornado hits. Except there were no clouds, no wind, no anything. And then, at the end of our street, the sky shimmered. That's the best word I've got for it. Like heat off asphalt, except it was 20 feet above the tree line and stretching across the road, just hovering there. You could see stars through it, but they looked distorted, like you were seeing them through moving water. A couple people started walking toward it, slowly, hesitantly. Kendra grabbed my arm. She wasn't saying a word, but her grip told me she wanted to go inside. I didn't move. Then everything went dark again. Not blackout dark, darker. Like the sky itself blinked, the shimmer vanished, the siren stopped mid-howl, the hum dropped out like someone killed the power to the whole planet. It was completely silent. No crickets, no dogs, no wind, just nothing. And then, lights. All of them, back on at once. Porch lights, street lamps, house lights. The refrigerator inside clicked. My phone buzzed back to life. The town flipped on like someone threw a master switch. The people in the street just kind of stood there. No one spoke right away. After maybe a full minute, Hank said, "That wasn't normal." It was the only thing anyone said for a while. The next morning, I drove by City Hall. A couple trucks from the power co-op were out front, and the guy who manages the sirens, Glenn Otley, was standing on the sidewalk talking to someone. I stopped and asked if it had been a system malfunction. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. Said they were looking into it, but as far as he could tell, nothing had triggered the alert. No tests scheduled, no outage logged. Backup batteries hadn't kicked in because nothing went down, at least on their end. Over the next few days, people started swapping stories. A few said they saw something moving above the trees. Just shapes. Not solid, not lit up. Others said they lost time, their watches skipped, or their clocks reset. A guy on the edge of town claimed his sprinkler system went off an hour early. I don't know about that. Maybe people were just trying to make sense of it. But here's what sticks with me. That shimmer in the air, it wasn't natural. I don't mean it looked alien or supernatural or whatever. I just mean it didn't belong. Like it broke some rule I didn't know existed. And the humming, it hasn't come back. But sometimes when it's real quiet at night, I think I can feel that same pressure in my ears, like it's way off in the distance, waiting. We were staying at my sister's place in northeastern Oklahoma, just outside Stillwell. She's got this ranch-style house with a big backyard that rolls into pasture, and beyond that, a stretch of tree-covered hills. Real quiet out there. You can actually see stars at night, which is rare for me since I live closer to Tulsa. It was me, my wife, and our daughter Sophie, who's 6. We stayed for a long weekend. It was the first night there when we all sat out in the yard after dinner. My brother-in-law had built a fire pit, and the kids ran around while the adults passed a bottle of wine. The sky was clear, one of those late summer nights where it stays warm even after dark, and the stars come out early. I remember pointing out Orion to Sophie. She loves anything space-related. She had a little notebook with her and kept asking me to spell names so she could write them down. Betelgeuse, Sirius, Rigel, that kind of thing. We watched a couple satellites go by. One might have been the ISS. No weirdness, nothing strange, just a nice night. We went to bed around 11. Sophie slept in the guest room next to ours. She was tired but wound up, probably from the marshmallows. I got up once during the night to pee, around 2:30 or so. I remember because the hallway clock chimed right after I flushed. I peeked in on her, and she was out cold. Next morning, we were all in the kitchen eating pancakes when Sophie came in with her notebook. She said, "I drew the sky from last night." She flipped to a page, and it was mostly what you'd expect. Stars, constellations, a big crescent moon off to one side. But the weird part was right in the middle of the page. This big dark oval with no stars inside it. She'd drawn stars all around it, but left that one part blank, like something had blocked them out. I asked her what it was. She said, "That's where the stars went away." I said, "You mean clouds?" She shook her head. No, it wasn't a cloud. It didn't move. My wife kind of laughed and said, "Kids and their imaginations," but something about the way Sophie drew it bugged me. It wasn't scribbled. It was neat, deliberate. She'd even shaded the oval lightly, like she was trying to show that something was there, not just blank space. Later that afternoon, while everyone else was napping or watching TV, I went back outside to where we'd sat the night before. I stood in the same spot and looked up, trying to picture the sky from memory. I couldn't remember anything weird. No missing stars, no weird shapes. But I also realized I hadn't really looked at the sky long enough to notice if something had been off. I'd been too busy talking and passing the wine around. I brought it up again that evening. Asked my brother-in-law if he remembered seeing anything strange in the sky. Nope, he said. Clear as a bell. Stars were out full force. Why? I told him about Sophie's drawing. He laughed it off. Probably just watched a spooky cartoon. That night, we sat out again, just me and my wife. She fell asleep in one of the lawn chairs with a blanket. I stayed up and watched the sky more carefully this time. I don't know what I was expecting. There were stars, some satellites, nothing unusual. Then I noticed something subtle. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a faint sense that one part of the sky was off. It wasn't darker or lighter exactly, but when I looked directly at it, the stars were there. When I looked away, out of the corner of my eye, that patch seemed blank, like the stars flickered or faded slightly whenever I didn't focus straight on them. It was maybe 10 degrees wide, high up in the western sky. Again, not black, not lit, just a patch that felt wrong. I blinked a few times and even rubbed my eyes. Nothing changed. I figured it was fatigue or maybe some weird eye trick, but it lined up roughly with where Sophie had drawn that oval. At some point, I heard the cows out back making noise. Just a few of them, not the whole herd. Not panicked, but restless. I stood and walked to the fence. The field was mostly dark, just a couple distant floodlights. Couldn't see much, but I thought I heard a low humming sound. Not from the cows, it was too steady, almost like the deep tone of a fridge motor, except it didn't come from the house. It felt ambient, not loud, but I could feel it in my chest. I looked back up at the sky and that patch was just gone. Stars were normal again, or maybe they'd always been. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. The sound faded too. All of it lasted maybe a minute, two tops. I went back inside and didn't say anything. Next morning, Sophie showed me another drawing. Same thing, stars and moon, but the oval was smaller and lower this time. I asked if she'd seen it again. She nodded and said, "It moved." I said, "What moved?" "The thing with no stars. It was over the barn this time." That's when it clicked. The western sky above the barn, same spot I'd noticed the weird patch the night before. That day I asked my wife if Sophie had ever drawn anything like that before. She said no. She usually draws animals or planets, not sky scenes. I asked if she might have been watching something on TV that gave her the idea. My wife said Sophie had only watched one movie on the trip, and it was Frozen. On our last night there, I went out alone. It was warmer that evening, a little hazy, and I couldn't see as many stars. I sat on the same chair and watched the same patch of sky. I don't know how long, maybe an hour. About halfway through, I noticed the barn's floodlight flickered, just a quick pulse. Then the cows started again, more restless this time, like they were crowding each other. I stood up and took a few steps toward the barn. Couldn't see much, just some movement near the fence line. Then everything got quiet. No cows, no bugs, no breeze, just a stillness that felt too sudden. That hum came back, louder this time, but still low, like standing next to a big transformer. It felt like it came from above and below at the same time. I looked up again. There were stars everywhere, except for one patch that looked flat. Not black, not cloudy, just an absence. Same spot, same shape. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but the screen just showed a blurry, dark mess. I gave up and just stood there watching nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the patch kind of softened. The stars around it seemed to fill in gradually, not all at once. The hum faded. The cows settled. I went inside and didn't sleep much. We drove home the next morning. Sophie didn't draw anything else. I still have her notebook. Every now and then I flip to those pages. The stars, the moon, the oval. It's always in the same place. Just a little different each night, like it was moving, or watching, or both. I was hauling a load of produce from Fresno to Boise, running mostly solo like I always do. Overnight drive through northern Nevada, lots of empty road, not much cell coverage once you're past Winnemucca. I'd done that stretch maybe 20 times before. It's one of those routes where you can go an hour without seeing another set of headlights. I left around 7:30 p.m., trying to make it to the Idaho border before sunrise. The weather was clear, moonless, cool, but not cold. My rig's a 2016 Freightliner Cascadia. No frills, but reliable. The only thing I did different that night was bring my old dog, Rizzo. He's a mutt, part shepherd, part who knows what. Normally stays with my sister, but she was out of town. We were past Battle Mountain, climbing up through a long grade when I first noticed it. Not something dramatic, just this small, constant light in the upper right corner of the windshield. At first I thought it was a plane, but it didn't move like one. Didn't blink or drift. Just held the same spot a little above my line of sight, maybe 40 degrees up, and kept pace with the truck exactly. Rizzo noticed it before I did, I think. He sat up in the passenger seat and stared out the window with his ears back, not growling, but real alert. He doesn't usually react to planes or headlights. I reached for my GPS tablet, which has a radar overlay. It pulls from ADS-B signals to show nearby aircraft. Nothing was there, just my position, the road, and dead airspace around me. I figured maybe it was a satellite, but this thing was too bright, too close. I kept driving, thinking maybe it would peel off or fade out, but it didn't. Every time I rounded a bend or changed elevation, it adjusted. If I slowed, it slowed. If I sped up, it matched me. Never got closer, never drifted, just stayed right above and to the side. It was white, mostly, like a spotlight behind thick fog, even though the sky was totally clear. No beam, no noise. Could have been the size of a drone or a city bus. Hard to tell without a reference point. Around 1:30 a.m., I pulled into a turnout near a rest stop east of Elko. There were no other trucks there. I stepped out and looked straight up. The light stopped moving, just held in place, same angle, same distance. I stood there for maybe 3 minutes, just watching. It didn't blink, didn't shift. I didn't hear anything. No hum, no rotor wash, nothing. Rizzo wouldn't get out of the cab. He stood stiff by the passenger door and whined once, soft. I leaned back against the bumper and checked my phone. No bars. When I opened my weather app, it froze. After a while, I got back in and started rolling again. The light stayed with us, like nothing had changed. We went another 40 miles like that, me glancing at it every few minutes, Rizzo sitting stiff, watching the window. I tried scanning the CB for chatter. Nothing but static. Right before the Pequot summit, there's a long stretch where the road curves along the side of a ridge. I came around that curve and looked up again. The light was gone. No fade, no movement. Just not there anymore. It didn't come back. I checked the GPS again. Still no signs of aircraft, no anomalies. But here's the thing, my arrival time had changed. By over an hour. Like I'd gained time instead of lost it. My odometer reading was right, my fuel usage made sense. But the onboard computer said I'd left Elko an hour earlier than I actually did. That might sound like a glitch, but I log everything manually too. The timestamps didn't match. I pulled into a truck stop just outside Wells and sat there with the engine idling, trying to make sense of it. Rizzo finally laid down, but he kept facing the windshield, watching. When I filled up, the pump kept clicking off like the tank was full, even though I knew it wasn't. Took 3 restarts to top off. When I checked the fuel log later, it showed the tank was full before I even started pumping. I chalked that up to a sensor issue, but it was just another weird thing on a night full of them. Nothing else happened after that. I finished the run, dropped the trailer, and drove back south a few days later. Clear skies again, nothing in the air, everything normal. But I still don't know what I saw up there. And that time gap on the computer, it never fixed itself. Still shows an hour I can't account for, even after I updated the firmware. I keep that log saved, just in case. I was out behind the garage on the little rise that overlooks the pasture. Clear night, early October, not too cold yet. I'd been messing with the old telescope again, the Celestron my dad left me when he passed. I hadn't touched it much since high school, but lately I'd been taking it out when the skies were good. Just something to do to keep my hands busy. That night was perfect. No clouds, barely any wind. The moon was about 3/4 full, high and bright. I had the scope trained on it, just admiring the detail. The craters always surprise me, how sharp the shadows are even from this far. I had a beer sitting in the grass, and Milo, our dog, was lying nearby. He's a red heeler mix, usually gets jumpy around critters, but he was calm that night, just lying there, head on his paws. I'd been watching the southern limb of the moon for maybe 20 minutes when something passed in front of it. Just like that, a black shape. Fast, no lights. It cut right through my view, maybe a second or two tops. I blinked and leaned back, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Could have been a bird, I thought, but I hadn't seen any wings, no flutter, just a solid, dark shape, gliding. I reset the scope and waited. Nothing else crossed. I checked the sky with my naked eyes. No clouds, no planes. The sky looked clean. But I kept thinking about how wide that thing had been in the eyepiece. It covered maybe a tenth of the moon's face as it passed. That's not small, not unless it was real close. I tried to shake it off, but after that, I couldn't settle. I started scanning other parts of the sky, just out of habit, I guess. Around 11:30, I heard Milo growl, not loud, just low in his throat. I looked over and he was standing now, ears up, facing the woods behind the fence line. I called his name, but he didn't look at me. He just stood there like he was trying to smell something that wasn't there. A minute later, I heard this weird popping sound, like static, but deeper. It wasn't loud, almost like it was happening inside my ears instead of around me. It came in little bursts. 4 or 5 in a row, then nothing. I turned off the red light on my headlamp to let my eyes adjust better. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Usually you hear night bugs or the occasional coyote yip. That night there was nothing. Just Milo, dead still, and me with this uneasy feeling crawling up my neck. I started thinking about that shape again, the way it moved, smooth, no wobble, no noise. I've seen geese fly across the moon before. You can tell they're birds. The shape flutters, wings flap. This thing was more like a block, angular, kind of flat, and it didn't taper like a plane. A little after midnight, the pasture lit up faintly, not like floodlights or anything, more like the way snow reflects light from a distant town. Except there was no snow, and Oakview is the only town near us, and it's 12 miles off. No reason it would light up our field like that. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Enough to make Milo back up a few steps and whine. I turned in a full circle, trying to find the source, but it was just this dim, sourceless glow that faded as quick as it came. I packed up the scope after that. No real reason. I wasn't scared, not then, just done. The feeling you get when the woods go silent right before a storm rolls in, even when the sky says otherwise. We headed toward the house. Milo kept glancing behind us. I didn't look back. Inside, I poured another beer and stood at the kitchen window looking out toward the rise. You couldn't see much past the tree line, but I watched anyway. At 1:14 a.m., every clock in the house reset. Not just blinked, full reset like the power had been out. But nothing else had turned off. The fridge hummed steady. The porch light stayed on. I walked through each room, checking outlets and breakers. Nothing tripped, nothing off. Just the clocks. Microwave, stove, coffee maker, wall clock in the den, all blinking 12. I stayed up until about 3. Never saw or heard anything else. The next day, I asked around. Our neighbor Anita said her motion lights kept triggering around 11:30, but she never saw anything out there. Said her cat wouldn't come out from under the bed until morning. Milo was weird for a few days after that. Didn't want to go outside at night, which is unlike him. He'd just stand at the door, staring out like something was still there. I took the scope out again the next week, but I haven't seen anything like that shape since. Just stars and satellites and the moon, same as usual. I don't know what passed between me and the moon that night. I just know it wasn't a bird and it wasn't a plane. And for a few hours after it did, the world felt off, like something was near that wasn't supposed to be. I've been running the same trail for a while now, maybe 6 months. It's a loop through the woods near my place in southern Vermont, just past the edge of a small town called Brattleboro. It's quiet out there, mostly trees, a few fields, and some old logging roads that aren't used much anymore. I like it because it's peaceful and the terrain is The terrain is easy enough to keep a steady pace without worrying about traffic or crowds. Um, I usually run in the evenings after work, right around dusk. Sometimes I'm out there earlier, sometimes it's already getting dark. The time shifts a bit with the seasons. I go alone with my dog, a lean mutt named Jasper, who's mostly calm but loves running off leash in the woods. He's been with me since he was a pup, a rescue, probably part border collie or something. Smart guy, sticks close unless he spots a squirrel or deer. So one night about 2 months ago, I was halfway through the loop when I noticed something. It was just starting to get dark, and the woods were already deepening into that blue twilight shade. I was coming up a slight hill where the trees open up just enough to see over to a thicker part of forest across a small clearing. That's when I saw the orbs. There were two of them, just hovering about 20 feet above the treetops, maybe 50 yards away across the clearing. They looked like glowing balls. Soft, yellow-white light, nothing harsh or blinking, just steady. No noise at all. No humming or buzzing, which was weird because usually anything glowing in the woods at night makes some kind of sound. Crickets, frogs, owls. These were completely silent. I stopped running and stood there for a minute, watching. Jasper sat beside me, his ears perked but calm. I half expected the orbs to move or flicker or vanish, but they just stayed there, perfectly still. I figured it was some kind of drone or hunting light at first. But the glow didn't look like LEDs or anything artificial. It was more natural, like how a firefly glows, but way bigger. I scanned the area with my phone flashlight just to see if something was reflecting light, but the ground and trees were dark and matte. No reflections or mirrors. I shrugged it off and kept running. Jasper trotted along like nothing was weird. The next night I went out on the same trail. Same time, same spot. The orbs were there again. In the exact same place, same distance above the trees, same brightness, same silence. No movement at all. I slowed down to watch a bit longer and even tried calling Jasper over a couple times to see if he reacted differently, but he was just sniffing around, not really interested. After that, I started noticing the orbs every time I ran. They never got closer, never moved side to side, and didn't blink or change shape. It was like they were locked in place, watching. A few times I stopped and just stared at them for longer, trying to see if I could catch something. A beam of light, a shadow, an outline. But nothing. They didn't cast light on the trees below or on the ground. No heat, no sound, no effect on the animals. Birds flew past them without reacting. One night I tried to follow their path after passing the clearing, but the orbs didn't move along the trail or in any pattern. They just stayed in that one spot. The woods around them looked completely normal. No signs of equipment, wires, or anything man-made. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but Jasper always noticed first. He'd stop and stare up, hack his head toward that part of the woods. I never saw him growl or bark, just alert and quiet. After a couple weeks, I told my neighbor Kim, who's kind of a local outdoors expert. She hikes and camps out here all the time. I figured she'd know if there was some weird natural explanation, like bioluminescent fungus or an animal I didn't know about. She got that skeptical smile and said, "You sure it wasn't some guy with a flashlight or maybe glow sticks? People mess around in the woods at night." I told her no. I was pretty sure it wasn't human. If it was, whoever it was must have been super still for weeks and real quiet. She said, "Well, if it's still there, maybe I'll go check it out tomorrow." Next night, I went out earlier than usual with her. She brought a big flashlight and some gear. When we got to the clearing, the orbs were there. Same spot, same light. Kim shone her flashlight toward them and around the trees. No reflections, no wires, no obvious source. "I don't know," she said. "That's not normal." We stood there for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing changed. Then the orbs slowly faded out, but not suddenly. More like they dimmed over a minute until they disappeared completely. We waited, but they didn't come back that night. The next few nights, I checked by myself. The orbs didn't show up again for about a week. I thought maybe I was imagining things, or maybe Kim's presence scared them off. Then one night, there they were again. Same spot, same size, same glow. By this point, I was kind of nervous going out there alone. Not because I was scared of the orbs themselves. They never moved closer or did anything aggressive, but the whole thing just felt off, like the woods were watching me back. One evening, I brought Jasper and my phone to record video. I was hoping to catch the orbs on camera. I got about 5 minutes of footage before the battery died. When I watched it later, the video was mostly static and fuzzy. The orbs showed up as two blurry lights, but the footage kept glitching out whenever I focused on them. It was like the phone's camera couldn't process that part of the sky properly. That freaked me out a little. A few days later, I mentioned the orbs to a coworker, Dave, who's into astronomy. He said, maybe it's some weird atmospheric thing like ball lightning or something, but that usually doesn't last long or hang in one spot. I told him, yeah, but these things just sit there. No sound, no heat, no movement. Dave shrugged. Sometimes the sky's got weird stuff nobody can explain. I tried to forget about it, but it was hard. The trail was the only place I ran, and I kept thinking about those orbs. I started getting a little jumpy when I was out there at dusk. Not exactly scared, but definitely uneasy. One night, after work, I decided to run a different route farther from the clearing. I figured maybe if the orbs were watching me, I could avoid them. As I was halfway through, the sky started to darken fast. I was about to turn around when I heard something weird. It was a high-pitched whistle, but it wasn't like an animal or wind. It was constant, like a note held steady. It was soft, but I could hear it clearly above the rustling leaves. I stopped and looked around. Jasper sat still, ears up. The whistle seemed to come from the direction of the clearing, like the orbs, maybe? I started running back, not fast but steady. The whistle stopped suddenly when I got out of sight of the clearing. Back at home, I tried to call my sister, but the call dropped twice. The phone was acting weird. I rebooted it, and it worked fine after that, but it added to the unsettled feeling. The next night, I ran the usual trail again. The orbs were back in their usual spot, glowing steadily. I didn't stop, just kept my pace, eyes forward. But as I passed the clearing, Jasper suddenly bolted toward the woods, barking. I chased after him, but he disappeared into the trees fast. I called his name, and after a minute, he came running back, panting but unharmed. No sign of what spooked him. I looked up again. The orbs were still there, watching. I finished the run, got home, and locked the doors. That's where it's been since. The orbs keep showing up on my runs, always the same place, same light, same silence. Jasper notices but doesn't act scared anymore. Me? I'm not sure what to think. Sometimes I wonder if they're waiting for something. Or maybe they've been there longer than me and I just never saw them before. Whatever they are, they don't want me to get too close. And I'm okay with that. The power went out around 11:30 that night. I was already in bed, but the whole house suddenly went dark, like someone flipped a switch. No warning or flicker, just black. I checked my phone, no signal. Figured it was a local outage. The wind had picked up outside, trees were creaking, but no storm or rain. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and went downstairs to check the fuse box, thinking maybe a breaker tripped. Everything looked fine. I thought about going outside to see if my neighbors had power, but it was cold and quiet. My dog, Finley, a medium-sized terrier mix with a gray muzzle, was restless, pacing near the door. We stayed inside, windows shut tight. The weird part started when I went to check the security cameras. I have a system with 2 cameras on the back of the house, mostly to keep an eye on the yard and driveway. Usually, I check the footage from my phone app, but the app was offline because of the power and internet outage. When power came back around 1:15 a.m., I got back on my phone to check the cameras. The living room lights flickered on, the fridge hummed back to life, and my phone finally showed the camera feed. That's when I saw it. The video showed the yard starting at 11:30 p.m., the moment the power cut out. It was grainy, low-light black and white, but you could make out shapes. The wooden fence, the tall spruce tree near the corner, the patch of grass where Finley likes to dig. Then, about 20 seconds into the footage, a slow, smooth shape appeared from the right side of the frame. It hovered just above the treetops, gliding silently across the yard. It looked like some kind of craft, maybe a rounded, slightly elongated silhouette with soft edges, no sharp lines or visible wings. It didn't shine or flash any lights. It was just there, moving quietly and deliberately about 10 feet above the grass, drifting toward the left side of the frame. The thing moved too smoothly, like it was floating in water, and made no sound at all. Finley was on the porch, barking once or twice, but no other noises. What got me was how slow and deliberate it was, like it was surveying or searching. The footage showed it drifting for about 45 seconds before it vanished past the camera's edge. But then, right after that, the footage turned to static and glitching. The video became corrupted, skipping in and out, freezing on static lines, the image flickering like a broken TV signal. No matter what I tried, I couldn't recover or view any of the footage past that point. The file was damaged, unreadable. I went outside right away, flashlight in hand, hoping to find some sign the thing had actually been there. The yard looked normal. No footprints, no scorch marks, no broken branches. Finley circled a few times, but didn't dig or sniff anything unusual. I checked the rest of the house's electronics. Nothing was broken or acting weird aside from the power outage itself. The next morning, I asked a neighbor if they'd lost power too. They said yes, but they didn't notice anything strange outside. I didn't mention the footage. Over the next week, I kept watching the camera feed whenever I could. The cameras stayed online normally, but that night's footage was the only one that showed the weird shape. Sometimes I wondered if it was some kind of drone or a weather balloon, but nothing fit. No blinking lights or noise, no equipment, no explanation. A few nights later, the power went out again, same time, same pattern, but the camera didn't capture anything unusual, just the yard in darkness until the power came back. I started feeling on edge in my own backyard, like something was watching from the trees. Finley didn't like it either. He'd growl softly sometimes at the edges of the yard, staring into the dark. One night, I sat on the back porch late, watching the treetops. The air was cold and still. I thought I saw a faint glow far off, moving slowly behind the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. No flashes, no sounds, just a feeling that something was there, drifting somewhere out of sight. I don't know what it was or why the footage broke right after it appeared. The whole thing keeps me up sometimes, thinking about what else might have been caught or what might have been lost. I was out on the lake just before midnight, alone in my small aluminum boat. It was late May, the kind of night where the air still carries that cool bite even though the days have started warming up. The water was calm, almost glassy, with just enough ripple to catch the moonlight. I'd been fishing the same spot for years, usually just me and my dog, a brindle pit mix named Rufus. He wasn't much for swimming, but liked riding in the boat, especially when the bugs weren't too bad. That night, Rufus was curled up in the bow, sleeping, and I was leaning back on the bench seat, half watching the water, half zoning out. The only sound was the gentle slap of the lake against the hull and the occasional call of a loon somewhere far off. I'd caught a couple of perch earlier, but I wasn't in a hurry to fill the cooler. Mostly, I just liked being out there, away from everything. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed these lights, 2 of them, right on the water's surface ahead of me. They were about 20 feet apart, maybe the size of a softball each, and they glowed a steady, pale blue. The weird thing was how perfectly still they were, reflecting almost mirror-like on the water. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light from the moon or maybe some bioluminescent bugs or algae, but I've been on this lake a lot and never seen anything like it. I blinked and leaned forward, rubbing my eyes to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The lights stayed exactly where they were. No flickering, no movement. The reflections were so precise that if you looked at just the water, you'd swear the lights were floating right there, almost beneath the surface. Curious, I looked up to try and spot the source. Maybe a drone or some kind of floating device, but when I did, there was nothing in the sky. Just the usual stars, a few clouds drifting by, and the faint glow of the moon. No lights, no shadows, no movement. Just empty night. That's when I realized the water was rippling gently exactly where the lights had been. Like something had just moved through it and disappeared, leaving those pale blue glows behind on the surface. I shifted the boat forward slowly, trying to get closer. The lights didn't move, but the ripples spread out in widening circles. Rufus woke up, ears perked, and looked toward the water, growling low in his throat. Usually, he was calm, but something about the whole thing unsettled him. I tried to call Rufus back, but he stayed fixated on the water. I thought about turning back, but the lights held my attention. They didn't feel threatening, but they felt out of place, like someone had dropped something strange into the lake. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen stayed black. The camera wouldn't open, freezing every time I tapped it. I thought maybe the battery was dead, but the phone still showed a full charge. I tried restarting it, but nothing changed. The lights remained steady, silent, and unmoving. I sat there for a few more minutes, eyes flicking between the water and the sky, and then I noticed something else, a faint humming. Not loud, but a steady vibration that you could only hear if you listened really close. It wasn't coming from the boat or the engine. I wasn't running it, but from the water itself, just beneath those glowing spots. I reached down to check the motor, just in case, but it was cold and off. Rufus was now whining softly, nudging my hand with his nose. I looked back at the water, and one of the lights started to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if it was floating just below the surface. That's when the ripples turned chaotic. The smooth circles became jagged waves, splashing against the sides of the boat. Rufus barked sharply and scrambled toward me, tail between his legs. I decided to head back to shore. I started the motor, and the engine sputtered once before roaring to life. The lights on the water stayed where they were as I sped away, but the ripples spread faster now, like something big was moving just under the surface. When I got back to the dock, Rufus jumped off and ran straight for the house like he'd never want to be on the lake again. I sat on the porch, watching the water, but the lights were gone. No reflections, no ripples, nothing out of the ordinary. The next day, I asked some of the other fishermen if they'd seen anything strange the night before. They shrugged, said it had been a quiet, clear night, no weird lights or noises. I told them about the blue glows, but they just laughed, saying I must have been seeing things or maybe some new kind of bug light. I checked my phone later, hoping the camera might have saved something, but the app showed no photos from that night. Just the usual shots of the dock and the boat. It was like the whole thing never happened. I've been back on the lake a few times since then, but I haven't seen those lights again. Rufus still won't go near the water at night, and neither will I. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I think I can hear that faint humming coming from somewhere deep under the surface where the water is darkest. I woke up that morning because Rufus, my old lab, was pawing at the bedroom door, whining like something was wrong. I figured he probably needed to go out, so I got up, grabbed my slippers, and headed downstairs. It was early May in Vermont, still cool outside, but bright with that kind of fresh spring sunlight that feels new, even if you've seen it 100 times. I let Rufus out the back door first, and when I stepped onto the porch, I saw it right away. The garden. It's a small patch, mostly tomatoes, basil, a couple of pepper plants, and some sunflowers I've been growing just for the hell of it. Usually the plants are kind of scattered, facing all sorts of directions, just wherever they grew or turned naturally toward the sun. But that morning, every single one of them was turned the exact same way. They all leaned, almost unnaturally, like they'd been pushed or trained overnight, facing toward the woods behind the house. It was weird because I hadn't been out there after dark, and no one else lives close enough to mess with my garden. The fence is old but sturdy, and even if some animal had gone through, I don't see how it would cause the plants to line up like that. Rufus was sniffing around, clearly confused, but didn't bark or act scared. Just kept nosing the plants. I went around the garden, bending down to check the stems and leaves. Nothing looked broken or trampled. The soil was undisturbed. It was like the plants just turned. I thought maybe it was the wind. Sometimes storms will push plants over, but the night had been calm. No rain, no strong gusts, just that quiet kind of stillness you get before dawn. I shrugged it off, went inside to make coffee, still thinking about the plants. I spent the morning in and out of the yard, half expecting the plants to start turning back their way as the sun moved, but they stayed facing the woods. I called my friend Irene around noon, hoping she might have some rational explanation. She's a botanist and used to work at the university's greenhouse. I described it, and she said she'd never heard of plants just turning like that without some obvious cause, like light direction, damage, or a touch stimulus. I mean, they respond to light, right? Maybe the sun was reflecting weird off something, or there's a new growth hormone in the soil, she said. But even she sounded skeptical. That night, I stayed up late, watching from the kitchen window. Rufus was curled on the rug, half asleep. The moon was full and bright, casting long shadows through the backyard. Around 2 a.m., I saw something odd. A faint light flickered through the trees. A dull glow, not like a flashlight or car headlights. It hovered low, just above the treetops, barely visible behind the thick branches. It wasn't steady, more like a pulse or a shimmer. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, Rufus right behind me. The light disappeared before I could get close, but I noticed something else. The plants, again, seemed to lean a little more toward the woods, almost as if reacting to that glow. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the porch, watching, but nothing else happened. Over the next few days, I kept waking up to find the plants more and more aligned. The sunflowers had their big heads all facing the same direction, and even the tomato plants, which usually sprawl all over, seemed to be pointing as if they were looking for something I couldn't see. Rufus started acting weird too, sometimes growling low when he was outside, sometimes staring off into the woods like there was someone there. But every time I looked, it was just trees. I tried to ask the neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one seemed to care or had seen anything unusual. One afternoon, I was out in the garden when I noticed the soil looked different near the edge closest to the woods. It was darker, almost damp, but the last rain was a week ago. I dug a little with my hands and found the dirt was loose, like someone or something had been digging around. I wasn't planning to stick around to investigate more, but Rufus was barking suddenly, ears flat, eyes locked on the tree line. I looked that way and caught a glimpse of something moving. A shadow, maybe, or a shape slipping between the trunks. I called Rufus and hurried inside. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Irene. She said she'd been researching strange plant behavior, and something came up about plants responding to low-frequency electromagnetic fields. She wondered if something underground or nearby could be causing it. I didn't know what to think. The whole thing was just too strange. A few nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. again and noticed the house lights flickering. The power cut out for a few seconds, then came back on. Rufus jumped up, alert as ever. When I looked out the window, the plants seemed to sway, even though the air was still. That's when I saw it. Again, just a flicker of light from the woods. This time it was closer, a pale blue-green glow moving slowly among the trees just beyond the fence line. I grabbed a flashlight and went out, Rufus growling and tugging at his leash. But as I stepped off the porch, the light vanished. The plants, though, they were all turned toward where the light had been, like they'd been watching. I spent the next week trying to document it, taking pictures, videos, notes, but the images never showed the light, only the plants. Eventually, the weirdness stopped. The plants slowly relaxed, turning back toward the sun, growing normally again. Rufus calmed down too. I don't know what was out there or why the garden acted like that, but every now and then when the wind is dead calm and the moon is bright, I catch myself staring at the trees, wondering if it's watching back. I was working the night shift as a train engineer on the Burlington line, running the route from Montpelier up through the Green Mountains. That stretch is mostly quiet after dark, just the sound of the engine and the tracks and the occasional distant animal noise. I'd been doing this job for almost 15 years by then, so I knew every curve, every grade, and the little quirks of the rails like the back of my hand. This happened late one night in early October, about 2:30 a.m. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that makes you want to pull your jacket tighter, but the sky was clear, with stars scattered across it like someone had spilled glitter. The train was loaded mostly with empty freight cars heading north, so the ride was smooth, and I was half listening to a podcast while watching the tracks. Around mile marker 43, the train passed a stretch of woods that pressed close on both sides of the rails. It's a narrow corridor, and the trees crowd in tight enough that headlights only light up the first 30 or so feet beyond the rails. Usually nothing moves there at night besides deer or maybe a fox. That night, something did move, but not like any animal I've ever seen. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught what looked like a black shape sitting right on the tracks just ahead. At first, I thought it might be a fallen branch or some debris, but it didn't have any texture or shape that made sense. It was perfectly black, like a shadow cut out from the night, but with sharp edges. It was maybe the size of a large suitcase, but wasn't reflecting any light from the train's headlamp. I slammed the horn on instinct, the long, loud blast that warns anyone or anything on the tracks to clear out. When I looked back, the shape was gone, just disappeared, like it never existed. I hit the brakes immediately, but by the time the train stopped a few hundred feet later, there was no sign of anything. No debris, no damage to the rails, nothing out of place. I radioed the dispatch to report it, expecting some kind of explanation, but they told me there were no reports of obstacles or issues on the line. I even walked the tracks the next morning with one of the maintenance guys, Mark. We checked for broken ties, scuff marks, anything that would suggest something had been there. Nothing. The rails were clean and intact. I don't know what I saw. It was there long enough for me to react, but it vanished instantly after the horn. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or some weird shadow from the trees, but it didn't shift or move like a shadow would. I kept thinking about it over the next few days. The shape was unnerving because it felt solid but impossible, like a black hole of sorts, absorbing the light around it. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching me, waiting. A few nights later, I was riding the same stretch again, but this time, the moon was new and the sky pitch black. I was on edge, waiting for something to show up again. At about the same spot, I saw it again. That same perfect black shape, sitting right in the middle of the tracks, completely still. I hit the horn again, the blast echoing through the trees, and the shape vanished. No sound, no movement. Just gone. I called in right away, and this time dispatch said another engineer had reported a shadow object on the tracks in the same area, though they hadn't stopped or seen it vanish like I did. I asked around, and no one had a solid explanation. Some said maybe it was some weird atmospheric thing, some kind of optical illusion caused by the cold night air and the way the trees blocked the sky. Others joked about it being ghosts or something, but that didn't help. The thing that creeps me out the most is the silence it carried. No sound came from the object, no movement, no reflection. Just this perfect blackness sitting on the rails, blocking the way for a few seconds, then gone as soon as I made noise. After that, I made sure to run with the horn ready at that stretch. I never saw it again after that second night, but I keep thinking about those moments. The rails show no damage, the logs show no evidence of anything lying there. But I know what I saw. It wasn't natural. It was something else, and it wasn't afraid of the train. It just waited silently until I called it out and then disappeared like a shadow at dawn. It happened when I was working the night shift at a gas station just off the highway. Small place, one of those 24-hour stops in the middle of nowhere. Most nights were dead quiet, maybe 2 or 3 customers between midnight and 5. I mostly cleaned, stocked coolers, and half-watched whatever movie I threw on the tiny monitor behind the counter. There were 4 cameras, one inside facing the register, 2 outside by the pumps, and 1 looking out over the back lot and dumpster. They fed into this cheap monitor under the counter that recorded in 24-hour loops. I used to keep it muted unless something caught my eye. The monitor was always on, just kind of running in the background. Around 2:45 a.m. that night, I got up to take some cardboard to the dumpster. Nothing unusual. I stepped out the back door with a stack of boxes, kicked it open with my boot like I always did, and tossed everything in. The air felt off, not cold or hot, just dense. Hard to describe. I remember it smelled like rain, but the sky was totally clear. I turned around to head back inside and noticed the light pole near the edge of the back lot. It was kind of leaning, Not a ton, just enough that it looked wrong. I thought maybe my eyes were messing with me or the wind had picked up, but there wasn't even a breeze. I stared at it for a second longer, then went back in and didn't think much of it. When I got behind the counter, I glanced at the monitor. All 4 feeds were running, nothing weird. But after a few seconds, I noticed the feed from the back lot was showing me, standing there, me, holding the boxes. Not just frozen, it was moving, but repeating. I watched myself kick the door open, toss the boxes, look up at the pole, and turn around. Then it played again, same exact motion, same angle, like a 5-second video loop. I thought the system had glitched, so I looked out the back window to check if the camera was even pointing the same way. It was. The weird part was that the loop didn't stop. It kept going. I sat there watching it play over and over. I even timed it with my phone, the same 5 seconds, 12 times in a row. Then, just like that, it jumped back to real time. No cut, no flicker, just back to normal. The lot was empty again. I rewound the footage on the DVR. At first, it looked like it was working fine. The timeline bar moved, the other cameras played normally. But when I played back the section from the back lot, it just ran that same loop for 2 full minutes. No jumps, no artifacts, no error screen. Just that clip of me outside on repeat. When the loop ended, I saw the light pole in the new frame. Bent clean in half, leaning over like someone had wrapped a car around it. But there hadn't been a sound. Nothing had driven past. And I know for a fact it was standing straight when I went out there. I saw it. I looked straight at it. I got this horrible feeling, like I shouldn't go back outside, but I couldn't not check. I opened the back door again and looked at the pole. It was bent, just like on the screen. Steel cracked partway through, wires hanging loose near the top. No marks on the pavement, no skid, no debris. Just the pole, bent like someone had pressed down on it until it gave way. The air still had that weird pressure to it. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then stepped back inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't call anyone. I didn't know what I'd even say. About 15 minutes later, the lights in the back lot flickered and went out completely. Not just the broken pole, all of them. The interior lights were fine, the pumps still worked, but that whole section went pitch black. I checked the breaker, everything was normal. No customers came by the rest of the night. When the morning shift guy came in at 6, I didn't say anything. I told myself I'd delete the loop before anyone noticed. But when I checked the system again, the footage was gone. Just jumped from 244 to 247. The rest of the night recorded fine, but that section had been overwritten or corrupted or something. The poll stayed like that for about a week before corporate sent someone to fix it. They didn't ask questions, just replaced it and left. I never saw anything like that again, but I always kept the monitor unmuted after that. I was sitting on the back porch late one Saturday morning, sipping coffee and scrolling on my phone when I noticed something off in the backyard. At first, I thought maybe I was just seeing things, but the grass near the fence was definitely different. It looked burnt, like a patch about the size of a car tire, maybe bigger, except it wasn't a random scorch. It was shaped like a perfect spiral. I got up and walked closer, half expecting to find some kids had messed around and set something on fire overnight. But the edges were clean, no singed leaves or burnt debris anywhere else, just that spiral patch. The grass was brown and dry in that exact shape, and the center was even more faded, almost bleached out. I ran my fingers over it, and the ground underneath felt hard, almost like it had been pressed down or compacted. The weirdest part was how perfect the spiral was. I've seen crop circles on TV and stuff, and this wasn't exactly the same scale, but the shape was unnervingly exact. No stray marks, no footprints, no signs of anything other than that one strange design. I live in a small town, and my backyard backs up to a stretch of empty fields. Nothing fancy, no farms or anything, just wild grass and trees. And I live with my parents, who were out at a farmer's market early that morning. Nobody else was home overnight except me and my cat, and I didn't hear a thing. Usually, if something like a fire or loud noise happens, I would have noticed. Windows rattling, sirens, neighbors talking about it. But the whole night was calm, quiet, and normal as far as I could tell. I checked my phone for any weird notifications or local news alerts about fires or accidents. Nothing. The weather app showed a clear, calm night with no wind or storms. Curious, I took some pictures with my phone and sent them to a couple friends, thinking maybe someone would joke about it or have an explanation. One friend asked if I'd been drinking or if it was some kind of prank. I wasn't joking around, but honestly, I didn't have an answer. I went inside to grab a flashlight and a notebook, wanting to document the whole thing in case it got stranger. When I looked out the window again, the spiral patch caught the sunlight just right, and I noticed something else. The grass right outside the spiral was unusually green, almost glowing compared to the burnt patch. That struck me as odd, like the spiral was draining the life out of the grass in one area while everything around it seemed extra vibrant. I spent the rest of the morning poking around the yard, trying to find anything unusual nearby. No strange smells, no holes, no weird debris, just that spiral. My cat wouldn't come near it either, which was odd because she's usually curious about everything. Later, I thought I might ask my parents if they'd seen anything strange when they got back. When they came home, I showed them the patch. My mom was quiet for a bit, and my dad said maybe it was some chemical spill or something. We don't keep anything like that outside, though, and the neighbors hadn't reported any spills or accidents. That evening, I went back out with a measuring tape. The spiral was about 12 feet across. I paced the distance a few times, and it felt like it had to have been made by something or someone who knew what they were doing. No way it was random. The sun was setting, and the light made the spiral look even more strange. The contrast between the burnt grass and the healthy green around it was almost glowing. I sat down next to the edge and just stared, feeling kind of unsettled. That's when I noticed the first sound. It was faint, a low vibration like distant thunder or an engine idling far away. I looked around, but the street was quiet. No cars, no trucks, no planes. I put my ear to the ground near the spiral, and the vibration seemed stronger, but it didn't feel like it was coming from the earth exactly. More like the air around the patch was humming. I tried to shake it off and went inside to make dinner, but the sounds stayed with me, faint in the background. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing what I thought was the humming, soft and steady, and the whole house felt colder than usual, even though the heater was on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up and saw a faint light flickering through the curtains. I figured it was a car or someone walking by with a phone flashlight. When I looked out the window, the street was empty, dark except for a few stars. The light wasn't from the street or a neighbor's house. It was coming from the backyard, a pale glow near the spiral patch. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was just a reflection or my imagination. I pulled on some shoes and stepped outside. The air was still, the grass quiet beneath my feet. The spiral patch looked different in the moonlight. Less burnt, more like a dull gray, but the glow wasn't there anymore. No sound, no light, just the usual night noises. I checked my phone for the time, 3:07 a.m. I stood there for a while, staring at the patch, feeling the quiet settle in again. Then, I noticed the stars overhead. For a moment, the sky seemed clearer than usual, like I could see every speck of light. That's when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of something between the trees at the edge of the yard. I blinked and looked again, but it was gone. I shook my head and went back inside. The next day, I showed the spiral to a neighbor who's lived here for years. He shrugged, said he'd never seen anything like it, and that maybe it was just some weird natural thing, though he looked uneasy when I asked. I kept checking the patch every day, but it didn't grow back or change much. The grass stayed dead, and the healthy green around it seemed to stay the same. Sometimes, when I sat near it, I thought I could feel a slight static in the air, like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up for no reason. I never figured out what made that spiral or why. No one else heard or saw anything. It just appeared overnight, perfectly formed, out of nowhere. I still don't know what to make of it. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning without knowing why. No noise, no bad dream. I just opened my eyes and knew something was off. The room was lit up faintly. which made no sense because I always keep it pitch black. I thought at first it was headlights through the window, but the light was too even, too soft. It was a dull blue, kind of washed out and slow pulsing it was breathing. Brighten, fade, brighten again. I sat up and immediately realized how quiet it was. Not just normal night quiet, dead quiet. No hum from the fridge, no whir from the ceiling fan, no power at all. I glanced at the clock next to the bed and saw nothing, just a blank screen. I got up and walked over to the window. That's when I noticed it wasn't just my room. The whole street was lit in that glow. Everything looked washed in this weird bluish tone, like a dim underwater filter. Houses, trees, the street. It was all softly pulsing, totally silent. There weren't any shadows. That was another thing that felt wrong. Even when lightning flashes or when a car drives by at night, things throw shadows. But this glow didn't have a direction. It just was, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I tried the bedroom light switch. Nothing. I went into the hallway, tried that one too. Still nothing. My phone on the nightstand was dead. Not off. Dead. Wouldn't turn on. I'd left it charging, and the cord was still plugged in, but it felt cold. At that point, I figured it was a power outage. Maybe a transformer blew or something. But that didn't explain the blue light. There were no emergency vehicles, no sirens. I looked out the window again, expecting to maybe see a utility truck, but the street was empty. And then I noticed my neighbor, Mr. Halpern. He was standing in the middle of his yard, barefoot, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, just standing there, staring straight up, not moving. I thought about calling out to him, but something stopped me. I don't know why, it just didn't feel right. I opened the front door instead. The air outside felt heavy, like just before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. No clouds, no stars, no moon, just that same blue glow. I stepped out onto the porch and listened. No insects, no wind, not even a dog barking in the distance. I called out, "Hey," toward Halpern's yard. He didn't react, didn't even blink. Just stood there with his head tilted back like he was frozen. I stepped off the porch and took a few cautious steps toward the street. The air felt thick, almost like walking through water. I could hear my own breathing louder than usual. Then I heard something else, faint but there. A low thrum, way off, like a generator muffled through concrete. It was steady and slow, rising and falling in sync with the pulsing light. I turned in a full circle trying to locate it, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, just like the glow. I backed up and went inside. I tried flipping the TV on, then the kitchen lights, then the microwave. Nothing. I opened the fridge and the light inside was off. I touched the milk carton and it already felt warm. I decided to go check the breaker panel in the garage. When I opened the door to the garage, I froze. The blue glow was in there too, but it wasn't bouncing off the walls. It was in the air, like a fog or mist that wasn't really there, but made everything look just slightly out of focus. The workbench tools, the rake against the wall, the bags of potting soil, everything looked like it was covered in this weird electric haze. I walked over to the breaker panel and opened it up. Every switch was already flipped to on. I tried toggling them off and back on, but it didn't make a difference. I stood there staring at it for a minute, then heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps on the driveway. They were slow and light, like someone walking barefoot on concrete. I stepped back from the panel and looked toward the garage door windows, but I couldn't see anything through them. They were all lit from the outside by that same glow, and they looked like frosted glass. The footsteps stopped just outside. I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting. Nothing happened for a few seconds. And then I heard something brush against the side of the garage, a soft dragging sound like fingers on wood. That broke the spell. I backed out quickly and shut the door behind me. In the kitchen, I grabbed my keys and tried the front door again. I don't know what I was planning, maybe to drive out of the neighborhood, see if it was happening somewhere else. But when I got outside again, my car looked wrong. The surface of it, the paint, was moving. Not literally, but the way the light hit it made it seem like the color was shifting, like looking at oil on water. I walked around it and saw the windows were fogged up, but from the outside. I tried the driver's door. It unlocked, but when I sat down and pushed the start button, nothing happened. Dead. No lights on the dash, no dome light, not even a click. I sat there in silence for maybe a minute. Then I noticed the radio screen was doing something. It was off, black, but there was this faint flickering behind it, like something pulsing behind tinted glass. No sound, just that light. I got out. When I stood back up, I noticed Halpern was gone. His yard was empty. That's when I got scared for real. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the living room with a flashlight that didn't work and a dead phone in my hand. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to go upstairs and leave the windows uncovered. The glow kept pulsing, but it was slowing down. The hum faded with it. After a while, I realized I could hear insects again, way off. Then a dog barked somewhere down the block. The fridge kicked back on, the fan started spinning, and just like that, it was over. Everything worked again. The blue light was gone. I checked outside. The sky looked normal. Stars were back. I never talked to Halpern about it. Never really talked to anyone. Honestly, I kept waiting for something about it to show up on the news, but nothing ever did. Power company said there was a temporary outage due to a blown line. They didn't mention the light. I was out in the field behind my parents' place. They live out near the edge of town where it's mostly farmland and woods, and I'd driven up for the weekend to help my dad patch a section of roof. It was Saturday night, probably around 10:30, and I'd gone out with a blanket and a thermos to lie in the grass and look at the stars for a bit. I don't get to see them much where I live now, too much light pollution. But out there, you can see everything. It was cool out, clear sky, barely any wind. I laid flat on my back with the blanket tucked under me and just kind of zoned out watching the sky. I remember seeing Orion first, then spotting the Pleiades and Cassiopeia. Just tracing the familiar shapes, nothing unusual. I'd been out there maybe 15-20 minutes when I noticed a tight little group of lights near the Big Dipper. I don't remember exactly how many, maybe 6 or 7, but they were faint, like stars you'd only see in a really dark sky. Nothing that jumped out right away. What made me notice them was how perfectly they were spaced. Not a perfect line, but almost like a shape. Not a real constellation, but it felt intentional somehow. At first, I assumed it was just a cluster I didn't recognize. I've seen a lot of satellite formations too, and I figured maybe it was something like that. But then I noticed the lights weren't moving like satellites, or like planes. They weren't blinking, they weren't streaking, they just kind of hovered in formation. And then slowly, really slowly, they started to shift. Not in unison. Not like they were all attached. It was more like they each started drifting apart at slightly different angles, just a few degrees at first, but it was enough to notice that they were breaking the pattern they'd been in. I sat up, watched them. They moved so slowly it was hard to tell they were moving at all unless I looked away and then looked back. Over maybe 2 minutes, they had clearly separated into 2 groups. 3 stayed clustered together, the others spread wider. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. I hadn't noticed it before, but the field is usually buzzing at night. Crickets, tree frogs, sometimes coyotes howling way off. But it had gone completely silent. Not like I'd tuned it out. Like it had just stopped. I stood up and listened. Nothing. Not even wind. The air felt weird, too, like pressure. Not cold, not hot, just heavy somehow. I took a step back toward the house without really meaning to, still watching the lights. Then they started to move faster. Not like falling stars or anything dramatic, just a steady gliding movement, each light drifting off in its own direction, no sudden changes, no flashing. But it was clear they weren't stars. Stars don't drift out of formation like that. One of them peeled off entirely from the others and started moving in a long arc. Not straight across the sky, but a curved path that looked deliberate. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just drifting. It looked like it was headed somewhere. I was watching that one when something flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned my head and saw a quick flash of white-blue light way off to the left, near the tree line behind the barn. Not in the sky, on the ground, or just above it. It was brief, maybe half a second, but bright enough to light up the tops of the trees. Then darkness again. I didn't move for maybe a full minute. I just stood there with my hands in my pockets, heart starting to pound, staring into the woods like I was waiting for something else to flash again. but nothing did. When I turned back to the sky, the lights were gone. All of them. I scanned everywhere. Nothing. Just regular stars. I tried to trace where they'd gone, but it was like they'd never been there. I finally grabbed the blanket and thermos and started walking back toward the house. My shoes were damp from the grass, and I remember how loud my footsteps sounded, like there was no other noise for them to blend into. Halfway to the porch, I heard this low clicking sound. Not mechanical, more like a tongue click, but fast and rhythmic. It was coming from the direction of the trees. I turned and stood there for a second, squinting toward the barn. It was pitch black past the back fence, and I couldn't see anything, but the clicking kept going. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks again. Then nothing. Then a single long one, like a drawn-out snap. Then silence again. That's when the porch light behind me turned off. It was on when I left. My dad always leaves it on after dark. I turned back toward the house. The windows were all dark, and the front room light that had been on earlier was off too. I stood there staring at it, thinking maybe the power had gone out, but I could hear the fridge humming as soon as I stepped inside. I flipped the porch switch up and down. Nothing. Then the light blinked on by itself. I didn't go back outside. I locked the door, double-checked the back door, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of water, just trying to make sense of everything. The next morning, my dad asked if I'd unplugged the router during the night. I said no. He said the internet had gone out for about 20 minutes and the clock on the microwave had reset. I asked if the power had gone out. He said no. All the breakers were fine and nothing else in the house had reset. I told him a bit of what I'd seen, the lights moving, the clicking, but left out the part about the porch light and the flash by the woods. He just shrugged and said, maybe I saw some drones or something. I know what drones look like. I've flown a few. They don't move like that. And they don't make everything go silent. I was about halfway through the drive when the fog got thick. Not just a little low-lying stuff. I'm talking full whiteout conditions. Headlights barely doing anything. Visibility maybe 20 feet at best. It was around 2:30 in the morning, mid-November, on a 2-lane road cutting through National Forest. I was heading back from visiting my sister out in the sticks, trying to make it back to my place before dawn. That road's usually dead after dark. No streetlights, no houses for miles, just forest and the occasional trailhead parking lot. I'd been on it dozens of times before, but that night felt different the moment the fog rolled in. Turned off the music so I could concentrate better. Cracked the window a little so I could hear the tires on the road. I don't know why, but I get anxious driving in fog like that. You feel totally cut off. I was doing maybe 20 miles an hour, hugging the center line, just trying to stay between the faded paint and the shoulder. Every few minutes, I'd check the mirrors. I don't know what I expected to see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There weren't any other cars, no animals. Just that white tunnel and the wet hiss of the tires. Then I noticed a glow in the fog ahead. At first I thought it was a car coming toward me, high beams maybe. I slowed to a crawl, expecting to see headlights break through any second. But they didn't. The glow stayed where it was, kind of a soft white that flickered every now and then, not blinking, just sort of shifting. I crept forward, figuring maybe someone had pulled off and left their hazards on. But as I got closer, I realized the light wasn't on the ground. It was coming from above the trees. That's when I stopped the car. I rolled down the window all the way and stuck my head out. There was no sound. None. The usual forest noise was gone. No wind, no bugs, no distant highway hum. Just this weird, heavy silence and the glow pulsing overhead. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The air felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier, and there was this odd pressure in my ears, like driving up a steep hill too fast. I walked to the edge of the road and looked up through the fog. That's when I saw it. It was huge. I couldn't see the whole shape. The fog was too thick. But parts of it would catch the light as it rotated. Not fast, just a slow, steady movement. There were lights in a pattern, definitely not random. A ring of them, faint but evenly spaced, and another row closer to the center. The way they moved suggested the thing was circular or disc-shaped. maybe a little domed. It was just above the treetops, maybe 100 feet up, drifting so slowly I couldn't tell at first if it was even moving at all. But what really got me was the silence. Something that size should have been making noise, engines, wind displacement, something, but there was nothing. Just that low, electric-looking glow pushing through the fog. I stood there watching it for I don't know how long. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 20. Time felt weird. My phone said 2:41 when I checked, but it had said 2:34 right before I got out of the car. I don't remember more than a minute or two passing. Eventually, the lights started dimming. Not all at once, just section by section. First the outer ring, then the center, like it was powering down. Then the whole thing tilted slightly, enough to catch more of the structure in the light. I saw what looked like ribbing or support beams on the underside, like the frame of a giant dome. And then it was just gone. I didn't see it leave. I blinked, and the lights were gone. The fog hadn't cleared, but it was like the glow had been sucked out of it. I ran into the middle of the road and looked in every direction. Nothing. No lights, no shapes, not even the low hum you sometimes get when power lines are nearby. Just fog. I got back in the car and started driving again. Didn't turn the radio back on, didn't even look at my phone. I just drove, checking the rear view every 30 seconds. About 10 minutes later, I passed one of those little gravel turnouts near a trail entrance. There was a car parked there, an old blue pickup, maybe 80s model, covered in mud. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe someone had seen it too and pulled off, but there weren't any lights on, and I didn't see anyone inside. As I passed, I saw the driver's door was open, not all the way, just cracked, like someone had stepped out in a hurry. The bed of the truck had a bunch of camping gear in it, and what looked like a rifle case. But no people, no flashlight beams in the woods, no movement. I didn't stop. I didn't see any other cars the whole rest of the drive, not even at intersections or gas stations. I got home around 4:15, way later than I should have. My normal ETA was 3:30. I wasn't speeding through the fog, but I don't remember slowing down that much either. I should have been home earlier. That pressure in my ears lingered all the way home. It finally popped when I stepped into my apartment. I tried to go to bed, but I kept thinking about the lights and how quiet it all was. I've never seen anything that size move like that. Or not move, I guess. Just hang there, watching. I woke up because the air felt different, too cold for this time of year, and there was this faint hum in the background. I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then I noticed these beams of light moving over the tops of the trees outside my tent. They were bright white, like searchlights, but there was no source I could see. No cars, no helicopters, no flashlights. Just these slow, steady beams sliding silently across the forest. At first, I thought maybe someone was out here, like a ranger or another camper trying to find something. I grabbed my phone to check the time. Just after 2 a.m., I figured I'd go see if someone needed help or something was wrong, but the moment I unzipped the tent and poked my head out, the beams stopped, just vanished like someone flipped a switch. The forest was dead quiet, except for the usual night sounds, an owl hooting somewhere, leaves rustling in the breeze, but something didn't feel right. I stayed still and listened, trying to figure out where those lights could have come from. The sky was clear, stars shining, no moon, so it wasn't a reflection or anything like that. I went back inside the tent and lay down, but my heart was pounding. I kept hearing this low hum, almost like electricity buzzing, but it wasn't steady. It'd come and go. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps nearby, soft and slow, but when I shone my flashlight outside, nothing was there. No animals, no people. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights came back, but this time they were different. Instead of sweeping over the trees, they moved in sharp, deliberate patterns, like they were scanning specific spots. The beams crisscrossed, paused, and moved again. It was so silent I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I started feeling watched, not just by whatever was making the lights, but like someone or something was standing just beyond the tree line, watching me watch them. I pulled the tent zipper up and sat against the wall, flashlight in hand, trying to calm down. My phone had no signal, no messages. I tried calling out, but my voice just disappeared into the night. The beam stopped again, but the hum stayed, low and steady this time. I checked my watch. An hour had passed since I first saw the lights, but it felt like minutes. Time was weird out here. At one point, I felt the tent shake like a gentle tap on the fabric. I froze. Then, just a faint rustling in the leaves right outside. I waited a few more minutes, then slowly unzipped the tent again. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. The beams were gone for good and the hum had faded. I packed up quietly before dawn and left. I didn't see anyone else on the way out. Just me, the empty forest, and the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't done watching.